Good morning everybody and welcome to the meeting of the Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee, the main item being a discussion on London Fire Brigade training. Can I make sure everybody's got their electronic devices switched to silent? Members of the public may like to follow at London Assembly on Twitter and use the hashtag AssemblyFire for this meeting. Can I ask the clerk for any apologies for absence?
Chair, apologies for absence have been received from Assembly Member Bacon MP, for whom Assembly Member Boff is substituting.
Thank you. And we're a bit thin on the ground due to transport difficulties. We are expecting others to drift in. I'm sure members would like to join me in congratulating Brian Reardon, Group Commander of the Brigade, who was awarded the Queen's Fire Service Medal in the New Year Honours list. I have written to him as Chair on behalf of the committee to convey our congratulations. Can I ask members to note the list of offices on the report and ask if they have any additional interests to declare? Can we agree the minutes of the committee meetings on the 26th of September, 16th of October, 5th of November and the 17th of December times 2?
Agreed.
Thank you. List of actions. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions?
Noted.
Can we note the recent action taken by me as Chair and a delegated authority in consultation with party group leads to agree the committee's letter to the Mayor of London regarding the appointment of the London Fire Commissioner and note the letter?
Noted.
Thank you. And that brings us to today's main item, the discussion on Fire Brigade training. Can I welcome our guests, Roy Wilshire, Chair of the National Fire Chiefs Council, Robert Scott, Managing Director of Ribbon Star Consultancy, Andy Rowe, Fire Commissioner, Richard Mills, Deputy Commissioner for Safety and Assurance, Sue Budden, Director of Corporate Services, and Matthew Hayward, Managing Director of Babcock. Thank you all for coming. We also have in attendance Peter Groves, Assistant Director of Training from the Brigade, and Gordon Reynolds, Director of Fire Emergency Services and Training from Babcock's. So now I think we can actually get into the questions. We've got quite a lot of ground to cover, and quite a few people, so I'm not going to ask for any opening statements. We'll just go straight into it. And perhaps we'll start with you, Andy. Can you summarise the immediate training priorities for the Brigade as you see it?
Yes, absolutely. Obviously, this is set particularly within the context of the HMIC report and Sir Martin Moore-Bick's report into the Grenfell Tower fire. And really, I need to start by reiterating what I said at my confirmatory hearing, which we accept those recommendations in full, and therefore the priorities that I'm about to outline in regard to training fall particularly from that. So my first priority is delivering the 3 key areas of training highlighted in the recommendations. In particular, instant command training, where we have accelerated the programme that was already in place to the extent that we've already trained 69% of frontline station-based instant commanders, and all have been trained by the 31st of March 2020. In the context of driver revalidation, where there was marked criticism in the HMIC report, again, we have taken a long, hard look at that and increased capacity to the extent that 77% of our appliance drivers will have now received refresher training, and we are on target to deliver the full training requirement by June 2021. In respect to control, refresher FSG training, which was a particular point in Sir Martin's report, taking into account the transition from stay put to get out, is being delivered throughout January to all control officers, and I'm told is on target to complete as laid out in the control implementation plan. Another absolute priority is the training delivered on fire stations by officers, because as both Andrew and Susan have discussed with me on separate occasions, 90% of our training is delivered by our officers to our crews. That's essential because the maintenance and complementation of skills for frontline staff is delivered in this way. So in the last month, new guidance for training on station has been issued to officers, and a new face-to-face train the trainer programme is being delivered and will roll out from April 2020, which all junior officers will have the benefit of. So I think they're my key priorities because they speak directly to the priorities laid out in both those reports. And I've got no doubt you will question me in greater depth around the generality of training in the London Fire Brigade.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Just one thing I picked up from what you said, driver refresher training won't be completed till June 2021. That seems quite a long way off.
So I think,
in mind that some haven't had refresher training for many years.
I think Richard is probably best placed to explain the challenge of achieving that, and I'll hand over.
Okay, so driver revalidation for both fire appliance drivers and also officers for blue light driving
Part of the national operational guidance around driver revalidation is over a 5-year period. So what we have done since 2017 is had a programme over 4 years to deliver that training for both officers and fire appliance drivers. In doing so, we can then spread out the impact. So in effect, we've broken up the driving into 4 blocks over that 4-year period. The reason we've chosen 4 instead of 5, it enables those that are long-term sick to still be current when they come back to duty. We recognise that we started that in 2017, and the figures the Commissioner has just quoted is an indication of, in effect, being 3/4 of the way through that. We have worked with Babcock colleagues to look about how we can maybe compress that by a number of months, but we are very mindful that if we do compress, there could be a knock-on effect with a peak and flow kind of activity if we try and do it all in 1 or 2 years. It was an option that was looked at initially in 2017, and the decision was made that we would space it out over 4 years, and then it would be a continual cycle after that.
So as of now, how many of your drivers, percentage-wise, have not had revalidation?
So the ones for driver cars, we're at 63% currently that's been revalidated, and for the fire appliance drivers, we are at 77% within ticket. So that gives you roughly, say, 75%, which is what we'd expect after a 3-year period, so we're 2% over on that. We recognise that we have another year to do that, so that will make up that difference of the 23%.
Okay. Maybe you for Richard. How do you assure yourself of the competence of all firefighters and staff?
So the assurance process, there's a number of ways in which we do that. So as well as looking at the acquisition training and how our policies and our training is implemented with Babcock, and we have an arrangement with Babcock that we can go in and inspect the training that's being delivered by them. We also have operation assurance officers that will go to stations, so they're independent from the fire station function, and they will look and audit, so that'll be our second line of audit process, to make sure the training has been delivered effectively. We also have station-based commanders that are responsible for looking at the ongoing maintenance through our DAMOP process, development, maintenance and operational professionalism. So there is a number of ways in which we assure ourselves that people are suitably qualified and trained. There are processes in place through our Operational Professionalism Board, which I chair currently, to look at any patterns and trends that come out, not only during the training period on station, but also on the incident ground through our operational review team. If there are any patterns and trends, we then look at where that possible failure could be, whether that is through training, maintenance of skills, or whether that is just an individual failing that we then need to develop that person. So we have a number of processes in place. If there are any fundamental issues, that will then go on to an improvement plan, an operational improvement plan, which we will then provide assurance to the Commissioner that we are actually developing and maintaining that quality assurance.
If I might add a couple of points on that as well. We're looking at assurance as a whole as part of the corporate plan to deliver a transformation against the recommendations laid out in the 2 reports, and I know that you've had a copy of that late yesterday or early today. As part of that, I'm going to ask for an independent assurance advisor who will gain access to all areas of the organisation, including training. So there is an independent voice into me, and we're looking at an audit committee process, which again will wrap up some of this, not just around competency, but around the whole general approach to assurance and scrutiny for the brigade. I think something else that Richard might be able to answer in the detail, I think one particular area of concern highlighted in both reports was about the competence of incident commanders. We've recognised that and actually have brought forward the revalidation programme, so the testing of competency of incident commanders is a priority. Perhaps you could give some of that detail, Richard.
Okay, so in regards to incident command currently, and then I'll cover the revalidation. So incident command level 1, we have 69% within ticket. We have other plans to maintain or develop that by the end of March, as the Commissioner said. We have Instant Command Level 2, 84% within ticket, with further training planned on the training delivery plan. And we have Level 3 and Level 4 at 78% trained. Bringing forward the revalidation rollout, we have rolled out Level 1 revalidation this month in January 2020. And as that's rolling out, we are now turning the resources to revalidation level 2, which is expected to start in September 2020, shortly followed by level 3 and level 4. So we have the ongoing development processes in place to make sure our officers are regularly trained, but we recognise the revalidation process needs to follow that. We're working very closely to get that done, ideally by the end of this calendar year.
So if we take level 1, are we still going to be seeing people who haven't been revalidated or failed revalidation in command of incidents after March?
So those that are going through the revalidation process, it's over a 2-year process, similar principle to the driver revalidation. Alternate years will be their development period. The second year, in effect, would be their revalidation period. Those individuals are assessed independently by a Babcock contractor in conjunction with ourselves. Those that aren't meeting the mark, and the two cut-off marks of 50% and 75%. If they are below 75%, they are deemed as requiring development through personal development plan, and we would work with the local and station-based manager to make sure that they are meeting that requirement. Anybody below 50% is deemed that we need to have some fundamental training delivered to them. In doing so, we would not be looking to put those people on the run until we are satisfied that they have met the standard. There is a panel that takes place that will do this piece of work, bearing in mind we have started to roll out level 1. In doing so, they will not only look at the process they went through at the time, but they will look at the individual's history. So over a number of years, as we're rolling this out, we will then have a history of people that have either been revalidated and what their scores have been, any development plans they may have had through instant command review following post-incident, or any other areas of development that may be a concern. So to assure you about the process, that anyone that doesn't meet the required standard will either be developed or taken off the run if it's not satisfactory.
Okay, thanks. So, Robert, you did a report, I'm not sure when it was, but I've read it, and Roy as well, this question to both of you. I mean, I think what you found was very much what the inspectorate found as well. What's your assessment of training within the brigade, Robert, and then Roy?
Yeah, I think, you know, as the report reflects, there were some very good practices ongoing. There was certainly a great desire to improve on the training that was ongoing within the Fire Brigade and also in the services delivered by Babcock. I saw a great passion from those involved in training to deliver the best service possible, and I think they were very welcoming of that independent review. I was given access to all areas of the service and, you know, allowed to reflect exactly what I found during that process. The recommendations within the report, as you say, are very similar to those reflected by HMI almost a month or two after my report was published in October. I think I saw a service that was willing and seeking opportunities to improve. I think I saw a service that had, you know, engaged my services because they wanted to know in advance of HMI report and the Grenfell Tower Inquiry report where there were opportunities for that improvement, and I certainly see from what's been outlined today already that there are steps in place to make those improvements, and I'm sure what is going to be presented to you in terms of the transformation plan will have a number of steps in place to make those improvements. So it's all very encouraging from my perspective, I've got to say.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree with Andy and Richard about the immediate priorities?
I think instant command was always going to be one of the immediate priorities, and clearly something that I reflected within my own report around officers being in charge of incidents without having the adequate training and without the Commissioner having that comfort that they were competent and capable to take charge of those incidents, and the revalidation process will give him that comfort and that assurance that those in charge at various levels throughout the organisation are qualified to do so.
Right.
Certainly, Chair, I can only take my assessment from the two reports, and I think you've had that assessment, and the acceptance from the senior team in London Fire Brigade is very encouraging, that there are gaps, there are things to improve. In terms of the risk priority, incident command, driver training and breathing apparatus, I think you can take some comfort that there's been no criticism of breathing apparatus refresher training, and they seem to be up with that. So it's not across the board, but there are improvements to be made. And again, the commitment I've seen from the senior team to make those improvements and to make them relatively quickly is really encouraging.
Okay, thank you. Online training, Andy or Richard, there seems to be quite a focus on that. How do you monitor and evaluate the completion of it, and are you meeting your online e-learning targets?
This is definitely one for Richard and possibly Peter.
Okay, so before I hand over to Peter, I'll outline where I am in relation to the e-learning packages and the projects, and then I'll hand over to Peter to a little bit more detail, if I may. So the e-learning is hosted by Babcock on their management system, and we have had 2 projects running in relation to the ongoing maintenance of operational professionalism, the DAMOP process that I referred to earlier. That is being delivered in 2 phases. We've successfully delivered the first phase, which is a culmination of all the training packages that both ourselves and Babcock hold to make available on a computer-based system to the workforce in a one-click kind of process, so they're not having to do multiple logons. That process has a system behind it that will allow us to monitor it in a very easy way, so we can see the percentage of people that receive that training, and it's spread out over the year to make sure that we have an understanding of when they're doing the training and what they're training on. Part 2 of that process, or that project, is to now look at our specialist qualifications, and we're doing the same process, which should be completed by July this year. The one thing I would say is that we have had MOPAC review our phase 1 of the project, and it had the highest rating in relation to the success rate of what we managed to achieve and deliver. If I can hand over to Peter if he wishes to provide any more detail.
Thank you. Just want to add in terms of the reporting. So in terms of the competencies through DAMOP, there's now a reporting mechanism which is available from an individual all the way up to corporate level, which shows how the individuals are performing against those set competencies. If there are areas that are identified that individuals need to progress further, then that is discussed with the appropriate management.
Okay, thanks.
Can I ask a quick question? Can you tell me how you absolutely ensure that the person that is saying that they are the one logging on is actually the person? Because this learning is so important. How do you know that person, or is it on trust?
Can I make a point about that? This speaks to some of the deeper kind of criticisms and the recommendations laid out in both reports, which is about culture and ownership, particularly by junior officers of the training they deliver to their people. So I'm very clear that junior officers on watches hold the responsibility for ensuring that everyone on that watch is trained to a competent level. And I think the trick is that it's a blend of changing the culture through a leadership training programme, so general behaviours and culture, improving the skills we give junior officers, which is what the Train the Trainer programme is about, and improving the materials that support them. And that we then follow that with a much harder-edged assurance piece, where we are checking the people who are delivering. So I think that's something that is in progress, because the reality is it's down to the individual to log on and complete that training. In terms of the assurance piece, that has to be held by junior officers, I think, and they need to hold their responsibilities for that.
Okay, I hear what you say, but it actually doesn't. It doesn't give me comfort, only because I've spent years being told that everything's fine, and I was horrified by this report. And God, you're not really giving me any guarantee that Joe Bloggs or Susan Smith, who says that they are, tuning in, is doing it.
I think I'm reflecting the truth, which is that if you look at any online learning system in any organisation, it's going to be password protected. It should be individual login. I'm convinced the vast majority of our staff will be doing that truthfully, because it is in their interest to, and actually London Firefighters have a pride in maintaining their professional skills. But I think there is no substitute for junior officers owning responsibility for training, and I think they haven't always been best supported. It's why we're bringing forward the Train the Trainer programme at a pace. That's the feedback we get from them. I think they want to own it. I think part of the structures we've put in place with the new DAMOP competency framework enable us to see much more clearly down to individual level where people are falling behind, and then get into the junior officers to ask questions in a much harder edge way about why people are. In terms of people saying they've done training that they haven't. Again, I think this comes down to the management, the line management chain. I expect my station commanders to be out there looking at training in the yard. You know, I don't think that's always happening the way I need it
I'm
to.
talking about e-training. When somebody else logs on in somebody else's name, they get them to fill in the right gaps, do the right ticks, and then they are said to have been trained. That's my point I'm making. I am wondering if there are any safeguards that Andy Rowe goes on to that and actually it is him that is answering the questions.
Rich? So there are a range of safeguards, accepting that we have a significant proportion of individuals there. So as well as the individual log-on that's expected, so there is that whole thing of you take personal responsibility. It's made very, very clear within the IT opening package around the officer's responsibility to sign that individual off. We have a programme with the station commander where they should be going around and doing regular checks quarterly of their watches and doing some of that assurance around training, and they then have to complete a return. That return is then scrutinised holistically and to see patterns and trends, and also to look at what is being filled out. And the independent operation assurance officers that sit separately from the fire station will then go and sample test. Part of that sample testing is around drills in the yard and exercising. Some of that sample testing is around question and answers. If it is found that there is an issue with either an individual or with a station, then that matter is flagged up and raised to the borough commander or the area DAC, and we provide information on that. If it is an individual issue, then we do that through the personal development plans. So the process of assurance, the reason we took what used to be our service standard support officers off of and moved them across and changed their function was that they used to sit under the fire station remit. So what we were saying is, in effect, could we be accused of marking our own homework? It came across when Andy and I were both ACs. It came across to me, and then we had that, in effect, that wall there that we were checking what was actually going on. So those processes are in place. When we get to phase 2 of the development of the DAMOC packages, then we accept that we will need subject matter experts to go and assure against those specialist functions, because we recognise that not every assurance officer will necessarily have all the expertise to guarantee that what you're telling me, what you've learned, is accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Going on to the London Safety Plan, again this came out the Inspectorate. They're saying that the Brigade's staff skills and capabilities aren't aligned with the London Safety Plan. Are you going to try and do something about that with the existing London Safety Plan, or is that a project that's going to effectively be for the new one, which is not far off?
The answer is, I think we need to reflect it into the new London Safety Plan. So the corporate plan you have received is a plan for genuine transformation with clear actions and a plan for delivery sitting underneath it. From that, the new London Safety Plan should flow, following all the required consultation processes to do so. But that corporate plan is very clear in the priorities for training, and that training itself is about meeting the risk embodied in the London-built environment, the scale of its population, the risk here. So the answer is yes, it will be driven through into the new London Safety Plan.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to go on to Babcock in a moment, and I think this probably is Babcock anyway, because last night we were sent the training delivery plan performance document to 8th of January. It came with all the other stuff you sent, so other members may not have had a chance to see it yet. And you've obviously covered some of that in relation to incident command and so forth. But one thing that struck me was urban search and rescue USAR training, where the percentage figures of completion of the courses are appallingly low. Any comment?
So before I hand over to my colleagues, so we recognise, if you look at the wording in that documentation, there are sequences in which to do those trainings. Now, to ensure that we still have competent individuals, both yourself and other Assembly members have been invited down to Lincolnshire to see that exercise. So we recognise that releasing of specialist personnel from frontline can be challenging. We recognise that there are sequencing in which to do those courses, and if you miss one course, there is a knock-on effect to that. But for the assurance process, that is why we do those combined exercises, to make sure that they still have and maintain those capabilities. But we recognise there is also a limitation on some of those resourcing and some of those venues as well. But I don't know if my Babcock colleague wants to add anything.
Are those courses delivered by Babcock, the USAR courses?
Sorry?
Are the USAR courses delivered by Babcock?
Yes, they are.
Matthew?
Good morning to you. As you said, there's a raft of data in all of those kind of KPI activity. And once we get given the training design plan for the year of those volumes, it's clearly our responsibility to kind of push those volumes through and meet the requirement that we've been asked to deliver. As Richard has said, there's clearly sometimes a number of reasons why the availability of people to come through those courses doesn't kind of play out. I think what we would say, specifically kind of across the piece, is that we think our the throughput, especially this year, in terms of delivery of classes, is very positive, kind of across the piece. And in terms of availability of classes and throughputs of delegates, I think it's a very kind of strong performance. I think it's less than 1% in terms of activity, so it's a 99% performance activity.
Yeah, well, it is a bit patchy. I've picked out USAR, which are our most highly skilled and competent, hopefully, firefighters doing the most difficult jobs. And I am concerned to see the percentage is so low in relation to their training. And the other thing I was going to pick out from this sheet is high volume pump training, which has been going right back to the days when we were on LFIPA, was always seemed to be something that we're falling short of. We'd like to comment on that.
I wonder if some of the detail, if you wouldn't mind. Clearly, I've got a colleague today with me, Gordon Reynolds, who looks after the details specifically on our fire contract. Gordon, I don't know if there's anything you can add with regards to.
Well, certainly, if I may, Chair, is just add a point around the USAR training. I think I would support Richard's comments, and I think it's recognised collectively that there has been some issues in the volume of delegates who have been withdrawing, and I'm very aware that LFB are now working on the rules at which they then assign themselves to those particular courses, and therefore the plan for 2021 should change in relation to the USAR side of things.
Okay. Well, going onto the Babcock contract in a bit more detail. I think the first question is, can we see the contract?
So you might have to answer that in terms of the commercial sensitivities, but bear with me. I think just talking about the contract generally.
Well, can I have an answer to that question first? If it's Sue, it's Sue.
I'd probably refer to a legal colleague, but I understand the aspiration, and we'll see what we can do about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because the contract has had a lot of criticism from HMI, and I think it would be appropriate for us to have a look at it so we can put that criticism into context.
Yeah, I mean, can I just make a general point about the training contract? The training contract's in its 8th year now, with 17 years left to run. I think it's absolutely fair to reflect to the committee that we are operating in a vastly changed environment than when that contract was first envisaged, with different pressures, much more clearly articulated priorities, and therefore it's inevitable that the working and commercial relationships need to adapt. And as a response, and in response to that, we've initiated, along with Babcock, what we would call a major change process, a root and branch review of the contract to ensure it's fit for purpose. That's commenced. It's a complex bit of work. I understand that whilst it will deliver in stages, it could take 3 years, because we are looking at fundamentally, in the volume of our courses and the complexity, the whole thing. So we've undertaken to commence that now, as I understand it. I don't know, Richard, whether you could offer any more detail on that. But I would recognise your concern. It needs to be fit for purpose, and we will ensure that we address that as a priority.
Well, I've got quite a few questions about the contract, but I mean, HMI effectively saying it's too expensive, too inflexible. What do you say to that?
I would suggest that we certainly need to address the issue of flexibility, and I think Babcock colleagues recognise that. I don't think it does perform with enough flexibility, but then it is delivering in the way that the original contract was laid out. I would also fairly reflect that. I'm just not sure that the framework of that contract now best supports training for my firefighters. I would like to come back to the point, though, that whilst the Babcock contract is important, my greatest concern and my greatest priority is maintenance of skills training. And I do see opportunity in the major change review process to rebalance training to better reflect that priority, how we better support junior officers to deliver training to their own people. I do need to keep coming back to that, because it is easy to concentrate on the contract, whereas my greatest concern is the skill of our junior officers to deliver training to their people day-to-day on fire stations. In terms of the finances of the contract itself, what I would say is that, you know, the project to move to an outsourced training provider looked first at the existing training provision at the time, and in particular the training estate. It was clear that STC, so Southwark Training Centre, was no longer fit for purpose. Business as usual at that point was not a viable solution. I think the brigade at the time then looked at a second option around capital investment, whereby LFB would borrow from the Public Works Loan Board to directly invest in fit-for-purpose training solutions. That was found to be unaffordable, and it was only at that point a third option, outsourcing, was considered. That model was found to be affordable, and again, I have to fairly reflect that we've had two modern state-of-the-art facilities, including the real fire training venues we've now got at Park Royal, Beckton, the Technical Rescue Delivery Training Centre at Beckton, successfully set up with a third training centre to come. And I guess one of the benefits listed as part of outsourced training was future cost avoidance. So on a net present value basis, it is anticipated over the life of the contract, projected savings of £66 million will be realised. What that doesn't address is the shape of the contract and whether it's fit to deliver what I want for training. And I would absolutely agree that it doesn't in its current state, and we need to do a fundamental root and branch review to ensure it does. And I'm pleased that Babcock accept that.
I know this is you for Andy or Sue, but if it's such a good deal, why were the inspectorate so critical of the cost of it?
Richard? I mean, I'm not sure that it's a fair reflection, actually, of the contract in that sense.
So the HMI have been critical across the piece about a range of our contracts and our contract management, which has made me reflect as well. So we know individually how our contracts operate and our experience of them, but this implies something systemic in the way we're specifying and then managing our contracts. So it's certainly given me pause that we want to look at that. The question of the value of the contract, so the numbers Andy's referring to take us all the way back to 2011 when we did the original business case for it, and the value of the training venues is a key part of how the cost has worked through. But obviously the HMI have reached that conclusion, and we need to reflect how we respond to that in the major change that we're about to do. But I think we can't ignore the fact that we did get these two state-of-the-art venues, and that was a key part of the deal that we entered into. So the price isn't just about the day-to-day training that's delivered through a year, it's about repaying that capital investment.
And what I would say is that, and I'm sure colleagues from Babcock will attest to this because we've recently met with the CEO along with the MD and Gordon, is that I don't see this as a partnership. You know, it's not a partnership with Babcock. They are a provider and I am their client, and therefore I demand a level of service and I demand review and I demand change, and I'm not shy about having difficult conversations. You know, the risk environment that my firefighters are operating in, you know, is becoming more and more exposed as being complex and on a scale. The contract needs to reflect that. And I think it would be fair to reflect we've had very robust discussion about the shape that contract needs to take. It's my job as Commissioner to provide that challenge in there. I would absolutely accept that it is your job to provide the scrutiny, and I would welcome the opportunity to invite you in to see the training any opportunity really, both at a station level but also within our training venues, you know, whether it's up in Lincoln for USAR or whether it's out at Park Royal or at Beckton, and for you to ask searching questions and gain that assurance, I guess.
I don't know about the others, but I've been to Beckton.
Yeah.
So following on from that, is it acceptable that you've had to turn to Morton Marsh to provide additional incident training command because of shortfall of places provided by Babcock?
I'm going to turn to Richard to give a detailed answer, but what I would reflect on is that it was our requirement for massively increased demand in direct response to the recommendations of the two reports that led to that decision. And actually, I think it shows a degree of flexibility within the contract.
Well,
because
if that's the case, Andy, then presumably you got into that mess because the contract wasn't delivering in the past.
I think we have to take responsibility as a brigade because we determine what was a priority. I'm not sure that we prioritised incident command enough. I think we were too slow to drive that at a pace. That's about where we prioritised our ask to the contractor within our yearly plan around what was a priority. I think that whilst I want greater flexibility out of the contract so that when we do change those demands, it can react in an agile way and provide us the capacity to do so, I would have to recognise that not enough priority was placed on instant command, particularly at junior officer level.
I find that pretty extraordinary. I think most of us do.
But I wouldn't seek to excuse it.
Yeah. Can I just ask, Richard, how many places have we had to buy from the Fire Service College on incident command?
Okay, I'll
That
answer
would
that.
otherwise have gone to Babcock.
Sure. So there's a couple of answers, if I may. So asking about the contract generally and what we're doing around major change, I will answer your question. So the major change, the main areas we're looking for as part of those discussions, particularly recognising Robert Scott's review and recommendations, is overall we're looking for greater flexibility, improvement in planning, review of contractual KPIs, training design, whether we take that in-house, a 50-50 secondee model, so that's Babcock and LFB, and an increased gain share in Third Avenue revenue. In relation to the point the Commissioner made around forecasting and general throughput, so Babcock's performance we have back to 2012-13, but just to give you a general feel for the last 3 years, so 2017 to 18, their throughput of training has been 81%, 18-19 is 88%, and we're currently standing at 93% now with a forecast of 95%. In relation to...
Yeah, but that's across the whole piece, isn't it?
Yes,
and
yeah,
some
I
of
am
those
coming
courses,
to... Yeah.
like incident command, are far more important. I wouldn't say none of it's not important, but are a greater priority than some of the other stuff which will bump up the numbers.
So in relation to the forecasting, and I'm coming to the main question that you asked me.
So that is the question. How many places have you had to buy from Morton?
Yes, so the number of places we have bought from Morton at the moment is currently 11 have attended and are accredited. 18 are awaiting for the course results. A further 13 have been booked on. There are 22 currently long-term sick and unavailable. They're the figures I've currently got in front of me. And when we talk about level 1 instant command, 877 are within ticket. I will refer to make sure those figures are absolutely accurate from yourself, Peter.
I can add to that. So we've actually arranged for 293 places through the college.
And how much is that going to cost?
It amounts to 1.3 million.
If I may, so that additional cost is about forecasting within the existing contract. So that's not an additional cost incurred. It comes back to the forecasting and the scheduling requirement. So we've had to recognise that we are going to do that as a priority based on some of those recommendations, and we've worked very closely with Babcock around flexibility of the contract.
So where's the 1.3 million coming from?
Within the existing contract. So what we've done is we have deferred some training courses.
So Babcock is going to lose 1.3 million out of the contract price to pay for Morton?
In effect, yes.
What do you think of that, Mr Hayward?
The flexibility that we've agreed to do with the things the Commissioner have kind of talked about. We do recognise, as they talked about kind of KPIs and where we are in terms of kind of delivery, on any long-term contract, you naturally get to a position where you need to kind of review things, and we're clearly, against the backdrop of current reports and everything, we're in that position. We're used to doing that, and we've already committed to the Commissioner and his team when we met them recently to say we're up for all of that change. It has to change and accommodate. I think there's a number of things.
What does it say about your firm that you can't deliver, for example, incident command training at level 1 to the numbers that the brigade required and has required in the past?
I think it's to do with, as Richard said, the kind of the volumes that get put through. So this was a very short-term surge in numbers.
Yeah, but I'm talking going right back through the contract. You know, I mean, in fact, we've got fewer firefighters now than when the contract started. You know, about 10% fewer than when the contract started.
I think in terms of the numbers and the throughput that's been requested for us in terms of the kind of the training plan, we've been delivering, as Richard has said, consistently for the kind of the last 3 years. I think this one specifically in reaction to the recommendations was a surge dramatically above the training requirement and the volumes that we've been talked about, and we worked with the customer to kind of react to say how do we immediately deliver that and kind of respond.
Yeah, but if I were to go back through the reports on which Richard mentioned about the percentages of people who were trained in the early years at 80% or thereabouts and coming up, I mean, presumably, some of those would have been wanting to have incident command training at level 1, and it all got backed up.
be honest, I'm not sure of the kind of the backlog.
And then you end up where we are now.
With regards to those things, there's probably a variety of reasons that explain that kind of the backlog.
And we end up where we are now. How many places was it, Mr. Groves? Was it, you say, how many places?
293.
All but 300, yeah. Right, so looking ahead, Richard, Mr. Hayward, what are you doing to try and deal with this for the future in terms of making sure it's in the contract and we don't have to spend 1.3 million of whoever's money happens to be the brigade's money, happens to be the taxpayers' money, on buying extra places at Morton that ought to have been in the contract?
So the 1.3 million is the figure of the overall contract for this year. So it's not additional money in relation to the additional contract. It is reassigning some of those training areas, things like, for example, IT training.
No, I'm not asking you that. I'm asking what's being done for the future, for the next year, year after that, so we don't have to buy 300 places a year from Morton at 1.3 million.
So this is a matter around forecasting and trying to spread it out over the period around level 1, level 2, in conjunction with revalidation. So it's about forecasting the workforce to make sure that we have the plateau, that we don't have those peaks and troughs. Now, part of that work is looking at, since roll to rank, looking at the leading firefighter, sub-officer and station officer ranks and the training that we can provide within them. So in effect, we're planning on a 4-day block for each one of those sections compared to a 2-week period of training. So it's about trying to smooth it out and make it as easy as possible.
Can I also just make a general...
Richard, over what period is it going to take to make sure all this comes back within the brigade stroke Babcock?
So it's an annual training plan that gets laid out. So by March we would have done level 1, level 2 training. So going forward it's about the forecasting to make sure that becomes an annual and biannual training requirement. So that is about factoring it in. The flexibility of the contract then will enable us to, in effect, hopefully carry money forward, defer additional courses, because the contract is quite rigid at the moment, I think it's fair to say. What I would say is that whilst we did send the additional individuals to the Fire Service College to meet the requirements of Grenfell recommendations and the HMI, is that we work very closely with Babcock. So although it's not technically within the flexibility of the contract, they did show some flexibility in the way in which we engaged with Capita, which was brokered by Babcock.
So, Mr. Hayward, have you got capacity for an extra 300 places?
So, as Richard said, as they're looking at the kind of the training plan and trying to kind of plateau that to stop having the kind of the peaks and troughs, we're now working with Richard and the team to look at how we can do that. We're looking at the additional resources that are required to deliver that, and we have a plan in place to meet that requirement as we get more clarity of that over the
within the price of the original, within the original price.
We're going through a kind of whole major change program. It's all linked to flexibility. I think what I would like to say to kind of that point is that it does require change. I think we all recognise that. We recognise that contracts reach a kind of natural maturity. As the Commissioner has already said, there's a number of recommendations they need to kind of put in place. That will clearly, a lot of those recommendations will impact the service provision we provide for them. And it's timely and right that we review all of those kind of activities, how training gets put through, the kind of commercial arrangement, and we've committed to, and in the team, to review all of that. And indeed, we've started that process already in terms of those that dialogue.
And I think the other point to make is that I need to emphasise that it was something that was driven by myself particularly. I wanted a reset. So that surge is a reflection of a reset. I wanted people looked at. You know, if you read those recommendations within the reports, it was absolutely clear to me as a priority, regardless of the scale required in terms of short-term delivery across nearly 300 plus officers. I wanted them...
I think we all accept it's got to be done. We're just horrified that we've got into this mess, that's all. I mean, nobody's questioning the fact that they've all got to be properly trained to do the job properly and safely. That's not it. That's not an issue.
What I would say
is why have we got in this mess? Why didn't Babcock have the capacity? Why wasn't it followed up in the past that all these people were in charge of incidents without being properly validated and so forth? You know the criticisms, because it's not just us. It's HMI, it's the Grenfell one, and to extent Mr. Scott's report as well. So it's nothing new there. We all agree it's got to be done. We're just a bit concerned that we've ended up in this position. So, you know, I mean, the HMI, this is a question from Mr. Hayward, I suppose. HMI say that your training is expensive and inflexible. How do you answer the criticism?
I think can I deal with both of those individually if I can, Mr. Chair? The first one I think would reflect that, as the Commissioner said, the original contract, when it was let, let's just go back in that time, was let clearly in open competition, responded to the requirements, and it clearly reflected the length of the contract and hopefully the benefits, as the Commissioner has said, with regards to the two new facilities. We have an open book arrangement with our customer, where they can clearly see and interrogate the activity and the costs associated with that. With regards to the flexibility going forward, I think we've touched on that, and what I'm really trying to convey the message is flexibility is going to a couple of things. I think it's to do with the volumes, the activity, the mix that's going to be required going forward, how we respond to the comments in Robert Scott's report with regards to currency and do we increase the number of secondees. As Richard said, we're having those kind of conversations, but also around the commercial model to make sure, you've heard kind of an 80-20 number that's already been talked about already, to make sure that we can change that. So when, even with the best attempts of plateauing training demands in the future, we will need to accommodate change. Things will happen, and how do we create a process in place that we can react and support the customer?
Yeah, well, I hope you see it as a wake-up call in the same way the brigade seems to have done.
100%. I think we have to own responsibility. So in respect to revalidation, the London Fire Brigade has to take responsibility for the length of time it took to commission that. I think that is unacceptable. It was a particularly awful thing to read in the two reports, because we knew that revalidation was an issue. We knew that the testing of competency was an issue. That programme had been in design.
Well, so why did we know that?
Yeah.
Yourselves?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm afraid I can't speak to that in the past. All I do know is that since Richard took over responsibility for that, we brought new people in, we've driven the design of revalidation, which is why you now see it embodied in the face-to-face delivery of training and programmes that our contractors are delivering. That's the straightforward answer. Moving forward, that will never happen again. Okay. Richard, I mean, do you want to add any detail to that?
Let's move on.
Yeah.
Roy and Robert, in your experience, is the privatisation of training this way the right thing to do? Do Babcocks provide a better service than could have been provided in-house? I mean, Roy, how many other brigades have got privatised contracts with Babcocks?
Well, I think some of it depends. So there is a South West consortium that have a independent and private provider in a lot of their training through Capita and others. It really depends on the nature of the service, and I think the trick, as everyone's seen here, is how you write the initial contract. I think any contract, particularly public to private sector contract, the initial specification and writing is so very important. I think if you go across services, people will have contracts for middle manager training with universities. There'll be all sorts of different training and contracts. I think the difficulty I've seen is probably the scale of London is undoubtedly there, and that step change into what needs to happen. But getting that specification right and ensuring that it gives you the quality and value for money is imperative.
Well, I can certainly see the argument in relation to more senior officers, because you've got to have a critical mass for a training course, and probably do them good to train with other brigades as well, personnel from other brigades at the senior level. But at the more junior officer level, is this the right way to do it?
Well, I think you can't make a judgment on a single case, because if you have the right contract and the right people doing the right assessment, then it's the right thing to do. And I think that will come down to each fire authority and their dependents, or in the terms of London now, the London Fire Commissioner as employer, which is the best way to train their people. But that specification and the quality assurance are vital.
Okay. I mean, from what you're all saying, I presume you all agree that we need to have a fundamental review of the contract with Babcock to ensure it's fit for purpose. Does anybody disagree with that premise?
No. As the Commissioner, I absolutely don't, and that's why we've commenced it.
Okay, so the next question is, how long will that fundamental review of the contract take?
Can you lay out the detail of that, Richard? Because it's done in stages, and I think it's probably best held by yourself.
Yeah, so the actual major change contract from start to finish, we're looking at a 3-year period, but it will be phased in. It will be phased in. I'll be handing over to Peter, who's part of the contractual negotiation team. We have assigned individuals both from the London Fire Brigade and from the Babcock side to do that piece of work. I'm going to hand over the specific
Before you
details.
do,
Yep.
you were saying it's going to take 3 years to renegotiate the contract. How long did it take to negotiate it in the first place?
It's not about negotiating the contracts over that period. It's about implementing those sequential
Okay.
changes.
But I'll still come back to the question, how long did it take to negotiate the contract in the first place?
Okay, if I may hand over to those that were involved. Thank you.
So the original contract took approximately a year from start to finish. In terms of the major change, there is a working group that's been established, and we've had 2 initial meetings. We are looking at a phased approach in terms of what we need to deliver in the change to the contract, and there will be variable things that we would deliver over that period of time. The important thing being flexibility first, looking at how we rebalance the contract so that we have that flexibility, looking at how we can use our KPIs to more purpose, and then to look at a range of initiatives to bring things like design in-house, using a secondee model, but primarily we need to get that contract right, so that I would anticipate that will probably take a year, because it took us a year in the first place.
Yeah, well, you know, the fact it's going to take 3 times as long to sort it out compared to a year to do it in the first place, I think speaks for itself. Have you thought about bringing it back in-house? Andy?
I think the answer is no, because of the length of the contract and the potential cost to the public purse of doing so, and recognising actually that despite the challenge of ensuring the contract is fit for purpose, what it has delivered is better results in terms of volume throughput in the most basic courses we require to maintain competency, whether that's BA Real Fire Training, IEC, those things that are the fundamental for firefighters. Recognising the benefit of that, I would have to pass to a colleague about the potential cost in terms of coming out of the contract of that size. Sue, perhaps you could...
Before Sue answers that, you've asked for 2.2 million extra to cover gaps in training. Is it right that we have to spend more public money to solve a problem with a privatised service? Well, Sue can answer both questions if she
Actually, I think in terms of the ask for money, Sue, perhaps you could answer that, and the wider question of the cost of coming out of the contract.
So we did some work on the cost of coming out on the basis that it would be on a no-fault termination, because notwithstanding the debate today in terms of achieving the KPIs, we don't have a contractual failure on our hands. So the work that we did, we're looking at TUPE, they've got subcontractors, and also the whole residual value in the contract, given it's got about 17 years to run, and that was looking around £100 million in terms of termination. Then we would need to recreate venues, we would need to create training allocation set up internally, so it seemed quite a significant cost to recreate it in-house, but they were high-level estimates that we went through.
Yeah. How much is the contract worth per year now?
Worth a year, 15 million.
Okay. Andrew? Oh,
Can
sorry.
I just...
Susan.
I'm sorry, it's one quick one. Andy, you said that, in effect, things are not fit for purpose. You said since the contract was taken on, things have changed significantly, therefore changes had to be made. Can you put in writing to this committee what exactly it is that's changed that needs to be accommodated, and what your gravest concerns are? Because we need to know what you are concerned about, because clearly we have not always been told before what the issues are. So can you put it in writing to us what you're particularly concerned about on the training, what you will be, and I quote, demanding is changed, so that we at least know where you stand on this? Thank you.
Absolutely, and what I would say is it will speak to the recommendations within both reports, because I think they clearly identify the priorities and, most importantly, reflect a greater understanding of some of the risks in the built environment.
Yeah, if you could keep it as easy and as
100%.
short and concise, that would be great.
No issue.
Andrew, thank you.
So I wasn't just back to that answer, Ms. Budden, that you gave about a termination fee or something. Or what was that figure that you gave us?
So it was a high-level estimate that we looked at a couple of years ago, just to get our own understanding, and we worked it out as around 100 million.
100 million?
Yeah, I don't have the detail behind that, so I can obviously give you that in a follow-up.
So I didn't mishear it. Okay.
But a lot of that is for the is that the capital costs of the
Yeah, so the residual value in the contract would be a
rather
key
than
part
the
of
rather than
that.
the annual cost of the service.
Absolutely.
So that's actually apples and oranges in that you've got capital on the one hand and revenue on the other. How much would the revenue? Well, you can write to us with the breakdown.
We can write to you with the breakdown.
Can I just ask the Commissioner perhaps, or the Deputy Commissioner, what is the financial and staffing impact of the training recommendations in the recent reports over the performance of the brigade?
Sorry, could you possibly ask that again?
Yeah, what's the financial and the staffing impact of the changes that are required to meet those recommendations of recent reports?
Fine. If we're talking about the wider recommendations, the costs of transformation, we're working with City Hall at the moment to define those costs and how they might be financed, and perhaps Sue, you can give some greater detail on that.
So you're probably aware from your budget discussions yesterday that the Mayor's expressed an intention to establish a transformation fund and to look to fund that from financial flexibilities and look at that through the February budget process. So we're working with City Hall on the detail of that. In the meantime, the budget submission that we discussed with you in December already includes additional money for training to pick up around 3 of the recommendations from the independent review, which were moving to a 50-50 model so we second our own staff on a 50-50 basis into the contract, so we've got current staff helping provide training.
Are those, Andy or Rich, are those staff then backfilled by other firefighters?
Are we talking about the seconded model here?
Yeah.
Yes, they would have to, because we work to an establishment to ensure that we deliver the service that Londoners require based on our risk modelling.
Okay.
Another one of the recommendations is to insource the design function, so we take that back in-house. So we potentially speak to the conversation about insourcing, so we decide that we potentially take that back in-house. And the other recommendation was around having a central programming team. So these are all recommendations that came from Robert's review. And we would like to use the money that would remain in the Babcock contract, but we want to look at this through the change process to then invest in further training to increase the flexibility and the throughput. But they are high-level figures. There's a project set up to implement the findings of the independent review of training, and that will explore all that in more detail and bring individual recommendations through the governance process for agreement.
So do you have an overall figure of the number of staff that are going to be required for these transformations?
Peter Groves might be able to pick that up.
So in terms of currently the establishment for the department is 34. We are looking at, in terms of the central programming team, looking at an additional 6 members of staff. Those individuals will be responsible for ensuring that the maintenance skills is undertaken at the workplace, and coming back to the comment earlier around ensuring that you've got the right people and they are actually doing the courses at the right time, and there's no discussion about whether they are completing things in a fraudulent manner, then that's part of the work that the central programming team will be looking at. So at the moment it's 6 additional members of staff for the central programming team, and we're looking, as Sue has already said, in terms of bringing that design team from Babcock into LFB.
Right. So 6 doesn't sound like a very large number, but...
Can I make a general point about this? For me, and I'm going to keep on coming back to it because it's what I believe as a professional firefighter and officer, is that the area of greatest priority lies in the culture that surrounds training and the ability of my junior officers to deliver it. And actually that is not in the numbers, it's not in the cost of transformation, it's something deeper. It's about getting out into the watches, making officers feel more confident in their ability to deliver. And that actually speaks to the wider priorities of the transformation plan, particularly around leadership. It might sound like an abstract thing, but it really isn't. In the context of the London Fire Brigade, it is about how my officers on a daily basis across 103 fire stations, over 400 watches, deliver the bulk of the training to their own people. That is not just about the materials, it's not just about the administration, it's about their confidence, how they feel, their skills. You know, and I absolutely respect the question, but that is not about the numbers in the training department. It is about something deeper and probably harder to change, and in the longer term.
Well, in which case, what are the wider costs?
I think it's less about the costs. We have the people. I have a large brigade. Yeah. It is about how we communicate with them. It's about the leadership demonstrated at every single layer of management. There is a lot of experience in the London Fire Brigade. There is, this is the most complex built environment just about in the world to operate as a fire and rescue service. We provide a good service on a daily basis to Londoners, but somehow we have not best delivered an environment that gives my people confidence to train at a local level. I'm looking at that very closely, and I think the answer lies in a leadership programme backed by a train the trainer programme and an improvement in basic materials. I don't think that is necessarily high cost, but it is fundamental to the change I demand, and I think gives the best service to Londoners.
So I get that. You want to change the whole regime of training and to become more organic trainers, if anything. The reports were critical, however, of the value for money that was being delivered through the training programs. Does this mean these changes are going to be at nil cost?
No, I don't think transformation comes at nil cost, but I think I go back to my original answer, which is we are considering very carefully the real cost of transformation. We're working with City Hall to plan that. And as Sue has already given an answer, it's wrapped up in those discussions and the plan that will come forward. It embodies the whole thing.
I'm getting one day we'll have an answer to the question, but we haven't got one answer yet. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I've been in post for, I think, just coming up to 4 weeks, and we have delivered a corporate plan as demanded at my confirmatory hearing, really at a pace. That is a real plan around real delivery, and real costs will fall from that.
So when would you be able to respond to that question with numbers of staff and figures? We've heard about the training department, but the staff and the figures. When will you be able to respond to that question?
I don't think I can give you an absolute date. All I can say is that we're talking about that now, and that we do have quite well-developed plans, but it would be wrong to give you an absolute now, because again, I think if that corporate delivery plan is real, and I welcome the scrutiny from this panel, consultation, your thoughts, that's why you have it, is I could see that changing. I could see it flex. I think strategy has to be iterative.
We know these things are going to change. We know these things are going to change, and we know that if you give us a figure, it might have been amended. But in order for us to do our job, and you to do your job, is we do need an idea of what we're looking at. And I recognise you've been in post not very long, but just if you could just give us a time when we will know. Otherwise,
perhaps I could help here, Andrew. The big transformation you're particularly focusing on is training on the stations, doing ladder drills or whatever under the junior officers, for which you need the training the trainers programme. How much is the training the trainers programme going to cost? Because the junior officers are there anyway, so there's no additional cost for their time. It's the training the trainers that's the cost.
And that's, you've got the specific figure on that?
I'm afraid I haven't got the particular figure for that, but I can certainly provide that for you. It is due to commence from April, so we can certainly provide that information to you.
Is that within the existing contract?
That is funded within the existing contract.
And that's within the existing Babcock contract anyway?
Yeah.
And actually, Sue, you looked as if you were about to provide some further detail.
No, it's just we do have this commitment through the Mayor's final budget that we will be agreeing our transformation reserve as part of that. So that will be the first time you'll see a figure that we would attribute to the transformation plan that Andy shared with you. But then we're obviously in an iterative budget process. There's also an expectation that transformation needs to address all the things that we need to improve on, but ultimately ought to deliver efficiency as well. So you would say over a 4-year period, maybe we shouldn't be in a net additional cost place, and that again is part of the debate we're having with City Hall, how it will play out over the 4-year budget projections.
Okay, that leads on neatly to the next question. My next question, which is about the Mayor's budget has seen an increase of £2.2 million in your training budget. He's put aside a sum for that, and a further increase of over £1 million over the following 2 years. Can you provide some information on what that proposal actually includes?
Yeah, so I touched on this earlier, so it picks up a number of the recommendations from Robert Scott's internal review of training. So the key ones are moving to this 50-50 model of secondees, so using our own staff, seconded into Babcock to provide training. It picks up the in-source of the design function.
So how much is that 50-50?
I don't have the breakdown of those individually. I just have the total number that we've put in.
It's really a breakdown that was looking
so,
for.
as I said, we've got a project board that Richard is currently chairing that's looking at the whole implementation of that, and it needs to work through the detail.
So seconded staff, does Babcock's pay them or do we pay them?
I think the mechanism to pay that can be negotiated as we go through.
So that's not decided?
No, it's not.
Because this is part of the change process.
Part of negotiations.
So you can send us those breakdowns. When might we get those?
So we haven't got our final budget agreed yet, so that will happen in March, and then we'll work through this process through the project board, and where things fit in our governance levels, we'd have to come back for specific approval, so we can share that with you as we go through the process.
Okay. Right. But by March we should have some figures in front of us. And
March, we're hoping to confirm this high-level number into the budget for next year.
March for the high-level number?
Yeah, to get the budget finally agreed.
Yeah. What about the breakdowns?
So,
when might
as Sue's indicated, there are some transformational costs that will take some time to embed and work through, and our long-term aim is obviously there will be some financial benefits from it. So we need to work through that, not only once the budget's been agreed, but once the transformational director comes in, which is part of that requirement. So the aim is about how we restructure the organisation, having a transformational director there, which it's desired that we get some real-term benefits from that. In addition to that, we are quite open and acknowledge that both within phase 1 and any outcomes of phase 2, there will be some additional training requirements that will come out of those recommendations to the workforce. An example being of some of the courses that we've already identified and currently commissioned, which, as you know, the 64-metre ladders that are coming available, all the new fleet will require additional training. We are applying fire safety checks on station-based staff, which is one of the HMI recommendations, so that we have more people undertaking fire safety. So the time it takes over that period, about specific figures, other than the high-level ones, that will come out over next year.
Yeah, and obviously 64 metres as new kit, you're going to have to train.
And I think you're going to see that play out as we go through phase 1 and phase 2.
That's fair enough, but that's not 2.2 million.
That's part of the transformational piece.
Okay, Susan.
Okay, we're going to talk about the inspection report. So I'll start with you, Andy, and very briefly, what was your, or is your reaction to the HMI recent inspection of the LFB?
I mean, I think it reiterates what I said in the confirmation hearing, which is we accept the recommendations from the HMI CFRS report alongside those of the Grenfell Tower Inquiry as a whole. I want to implement the change necessary set against those recommendations to improve the service.
No, if I can stop you, I know you're reading that and that's right, but when you read it, as somebody that's worked for the brigade for years, what did you think?
I was horrified.
Yeah.
You know, I felt really sad because I felt that actually on a daily basis I've got excellent people who deliver an excellent service to Londoners, you know, one of the busiest fire and rescue services in the world. But in many ways, they had been let down by systemic issues that pointed to the need to improve the training environment, the way they were led, and that had played out in the most profound way. I think it exemplified a decline in professional standards, and I will do everything in my power to redress that and transform the brigade to ensure that they're providing a service fit for Londoners.
Well, I'm glad you say you were horrified and sad, because that reflects exactly where I was. Can you tell me, were you surprised?
In some ways, no, because I think having served for so long in the London Fire Brigade, I'd seen it coming up through the ranks. I think there are complex reasons as to how we got to that point that don't just sit within the London service, but sit wider than that. Going right back to the 2003 pay dispute, the outcomes of that, the change to fire safety regulation in 2005, not always seeing the unintended consequences of those decisions, whether it was a move towards IPDS and an MVQ style of assuring competence, what I consider to have been a very difficult industrial relations environment in London for well over a decade. I think there are so many variables that have led to the environment that both the reports identified and the consequences of that. But I recognise much of what was said, and I have a great desire to drive the change that I think Londoners deserve and our own people who are of the highest quality deserve.
I accept that now. I absolutely accept that. But what I find so hard to accept, and I'm glad for your honesty saying you saw it coming through the ranks, what I find so hard to accept is that perhaps Richard is in the same situation. If you see things that are going wrong in an organisation as you're going up through it, and you manage to get to the position you are both in, which is fantastic, at what point do you think, I need to make some changes here? Because I can see all these things that are wrong. I am now in a position of power, which you have been, both of you, for quite some time. What is it that stopped you saying to the commissioner or anybody above you or on, or peers, what is it that stopped you saying, we have got a major problem in the London Fire Brigade? Why didn't you bring it up?
I think people were saying that. I think I've known Richard a long
time. Were you saying that? Were
yes.
you saying that?
Yes.
And
Richard was as well, because I worked for Richard and then I worked with Richard, and I think that you can trace back through whether it's inviting someone like Robert in or actually immediately post the Grenfell fire, the setting up of an investigative team, that we recognised that there were issues. I think Grenfell was a particularly poignant catalyst for that. But yes, I think where I have had the power throughout my career, I have tried to drive good professional standards. I've held people to account, even if the systems didn't always support me. And I think I can fairly look you in the eye and say that I have reflected back up the line management chain those issues. I actually think the culture of the brigade has always been open to this. What I accept as an absolute truth is that we were not quick enough to drive the change we knew we needed to make.
Yes.
And it is a tragedy that Grenfell was the catalyst for that.
I was just going to say that. Isn't it shocking that Grenfell was the catalyst that made other people open their eyes? And that is so disappointing to so many of us. Richard, do you concur with all of this, or what was your feelings when you read the HMI report?
Feelings were very similar. I was sad and disappointed about how London Fire Brigade had got to that position. In relation to your question about raising it through the ranks, so it's the level of influence as well. So the minute I came in as Assistant Commissioner for Operational Policy and Assurance, as I've said previously around revalidation, as I've said previously around for driver revalidation, instant Kalam revalidation, it's about recognising not only issues that have arisen from Grenfell, but also recognising the issues that where I can actually influence those more effectively. So as Assistant Commissioner, there's a lot of things that we've put in train that aren't just high-rise specific in relation to Grenfell.
But if Grenfell hadn't happened, what would the brigade be looking like? Like it was before Grenfell, before all these things came to light? Nothing had changed? Mr. Scott's report wouldn't have happened?
I can't tell you, Andrew, because Grenfell did happen. I stood in front of that tower block. I looked at a boxing club that I'd been in many times myself as a fighter, as a trainer, exemplified everything good about united London communities burning to the ground. I saw the bodies of men, women and children come out of the block with my own eyes. I committed hundreds of firefighters at great personal risk into the tower. In that moment, it exemplified to me a failure in the built environment, in the regulation that supported it, and in some ways, our response, not in the courage and the endeavour of the firefighters that night, but certainly in the way we supported them. I can't undo what happened at Grenfell. What I can tell you, because of my own personal connection to that incident, how it made me feel immediately, the sadness of what I saw it do to a bit of London, and the community within it, is that I will work tirelessly to change that.
Yeah, I think, Andy, there is no question that we agree with that, and we certainly would always recognise the bravery of those frontline officers. Absolutely. That isn't what we're asking, though. We are shocked and saddened, all of us, by what we read. but particularly shocked having sat on these boards for so long, having been under the impression, because we were told, that things were okay. Can I ask you, Roy, what were your feelings when you read the HMI Inspector's report?
I think probably in the same way, you may or may not know, but I spent the first 23 years of my career in the London Fire Brigade, so and I'm still a Londoner, and so it's close to my heart. So I was a little bit saddened. I think we've also got to appreciate there is a long context. It's not just Grenfell around this. From the Bain Review and the White Paper and the Fire Services Act 2004 and the reduction of all national institutions, whether they're exams, whether they're advisory boards, whether they were standards of fire go, everything became localism. It was about localism and services went. We spent the last 3 years trying to, as National Fire Chiefs Council, trying to bring it back together again and get some of that. So we've got a new Fire Standards Board. We welcome the inspectorate coming back. So I think some of these issues would have come through from the inspection alone. I think Grenfell was very much like colleagues here. I don't think I've had a day since the 14th of June 2017 when I haven't discussed Grenfell or Hackett or related issues. But I think we've also got to put in the context of what's happened in the Phase 2 inquiry, the shocking revelations that we suspected that are coming out from how people put basically flammable petroleum liquids, all those sorts of things on the side of a residential building. So not all that blame sits with the London Fire Brigade. There are things to learn.
And we're not saying that. We're trying to find out what your views were at the time. I'm interested, if you worked at the Fire Brigade, the London Fire Brigade for so long, did you see all this coming up? Because from where some of us sit, if everybody knew this was going on, it's shocking that it didn't come up, that people in positions of power didn't say, whoa, hang on a minute here, we've got a situation that is wrong. We've just rehearsed it. Having a catalyst like Grenfell is quite disgraceful. Were you surprised by what came out in the report?
Some parts of it a little bit surprised. I mean, it's been 15 years since I left the London Fire Brigade, so things have moved on. But I also remember and understand the complexity of a service of this size and trying to change things. You know, it is very much like changing a tanker rather than a yacht. So things need to, and there's been all sorts of the industrial relations, the way the organisation has shaped, the way government has been involved, the way we did peer review. It's about the fire and rescue service and getting things back onto a proper footing for all of us, I think.
I know. I think the trouble is committees like this have to assure ourselves that whatever panel we're in front of, that they are fit for purpose. This is, part of London, and we need to make sure that we are satisfied that things are fit for purpose. I'm going to move on. In December 2018, the Brigade introduced a new operational improvement process and reporting structure. What does this involve, and what impact has this had? Andy?
What specifically are we talking about there in 20? Are we talking about the Operational Professionalism Board and the process by which we review operational learning and then deliver change into policy? Is that what that question refers to? Because I think Richard is probably best placed to answer that if that's what it does refer to. He has responsibility for it.
Yeah, certainly. So the operational improvement process has been introduced to help assure ourselves under health and safety and welfare work for the London Fire Brigade employees and also improve our operations. What it does is identifies both the local, national and international operational issues and feeds into that process. And there is a monitor of operational training performance to identify positive development trends and around incident command. This improvement is required to increase our ability to deliver operational excellence. The operational improvement process is coordinated and monitored and recorded in an improvement plan, which is then provided to the Operational Professionalism Board. Now that process not only allows for what the current issues are, when we have actually delivered those issues and those actions, it then gets stored in a repository which is our historical element. So we've learned from in the past that when actions have been done, they may not necessarily have had the historical facts and information behind it. So if we have a reoccurring issue over a number of years and we keep dealing with it and it keeps coming up, then we look at, okay, why does that keep coming up? Are we not delivering it in the right way? Is there some fundamental issue either in the policy, training, or in individual firefighters' understanding? And then that recommendation that comes out of that operation improvement process that's fed into the operational professionalism board, we'll look at that and say, right, okay, are we assured that that's being delivered effectively?
Okay, how many times did the operational board meet in 2019?
I would like to say quarterly, but I'll confirm that in writing to yourself.
If you would, please. But you think it's about 4 times?
Yeah, I think it's quarterly. We set it on.
Okay. Was anything specific identified at those boards that you needed to address?
So the specifics, I'll provide you with some detail in writing when I respond back to you with that. Generally, the operation improvement process will have a range of recommendations from the Grenfell findings. They'll be within there as the action plan. There'll be other elements within anything that we've done around our ORT officers, our operation review team, that will go out to incidents. So what are the patterns and trends? It will look at the national and operational learning, both internally and externally. So there's a range of things that come or feed into the operational professionalism board. And then there's a range of actions that will come out of that. So an example would be Ops News 37, which is in effect our internal magazine to firefighters and operational staff and the wider workforce. It will provide information around, so Ops News 37 was about cladding, high-rise, abnormal fire behaviour. So it's a means at which we can then commission pieces of work, whether that is to go out and assure something, because we're not comfortable with it, create some sort of training package, or create some sort of information note. And that's the process of the board.
Okay, who chairs it?
I chair the board currently.
Okay, fine. How many members on your board?
So it's a range of board members, so that it depends on obviously the heads of department. So we'll have our operational policy and assurance, we'll have our training, we'll have our regulatory fire safety. I'll provide you a list of the broad range of
That would be
individuals.
helpful, and they're all LFP people. You've got nobody.
Yes.
You've got nobody that sits there as a semi-independent.
Not like on the corner.
I think what you're speaking to is about trust and scrutiny, and you're absolutely right to. I can understand how you feel. I think as a general point, we lost the trust of a number of key stakeholders in our world, elements of the London community, people like yourselves who have asked questions and perhaps been provided with answers where you don't feel that they fairly reflected what was happening. I know that we have to open ourselves up in a different way. I welcome the opportunity for scrutiny. I'm not sure it lies within a board like that, but we should open ourselves up, whether it's through an audit committee, whether it's giving you every opportunity to come and see and visit and ask searching questions. And I'm not interested really in just providing a comfortable answer to you. I'm absolutely certain in the environment I now find myself in, we come here to speak the truth and to be challenged, and I welcome it. I think it's good for us as a service. As painful as those 2 reports were, as someone who actually has been coming up and through the brigade and has wanted to see change, as awful as it was to read them, I see them as an absolute opportunity to drive transformation. And I think transformation must include as an absolute priority opening ourselves up to absolute challenge and scrutiny.
Okay.
I have no fear of it.
So will you undertake then, if you have any independent reviews of anything, that you will lay them open so that this committee can read them and see what the findings are?
Absolutely.
Great,
No
that's
question
good
in my
news,
mind.
Thank you. What action has the London Fire Brigade taken to ensure that its operational policies and procedures reflect the national operation guidance?
Richard.
So one of the recommendations of the HMI, or observation of the HMI, was around national operational guidance. So we have a project in place around national operational guidance to integrate it into London Fire Brigade. We've undertaken a strategic gap analysis of our current policies, and we're currently 81% compliant in relation to aligning ourselves to national operational guidance. The remaining 90% are either partially or non-compliant. The reality being that we will never be 100% compliant, because there'll be certain things identified within national operational guidance we wouldn't want to adopt within London. So an example would be an immediate entry board for breathing apparatus, which we wouldn't support because we have different safe systems worked within London. The areas of non-compliance are areas such as Heathland and wide area fires, which we're working towards. We have a plan in place. In relation to delivering of the integration of national operational guidance within London. We are currently one of the first brigades to be trialling the national IT system to make sure it interacts and works effectively with us. We are looking at implementing the fire element on this new framework that we're operating on by April this year, with a project being completed of an end date of December 2020. But as I said, that anything that we are not compliant with because we choose not to be compliant because of our safe systems of work, we will then put a rationale and record that for why we've decided not to do that. What I would also add is there is flexibility in national operational guidance to allow us to recognise areas that are specific and unique to London Fire Brigade. So areas such as a policy and procedure around London Underground, that's very unique to London or pretty much to Metropolitan Brigades. We would want a policy there that isn't necessarily guided or stipulated within national operational guidance as it is.
Okay, it just seems odd that the London Fire Brigade have staff in place in Union Street and have had for a number of years producing national operational guidance, and yet it routinely ignores the materials produced for other fire and rescue services.
Could I perhaps answer that point? I think that's a fair question and a fair criticism, actually, and it's something we need to change. I think that whilst we are the largest brigade operating in probably the most complex environment, we should not be so arrogant as to think that other brigades don't hold lessons for us, don't have examples of good practice, and we need to face out better. The mechanisms are there. I think it's again about culture and attitude. You know, we do have the benefit of hosting National Operational Guidance Programme team and also the CPO. You know, I think we need to make better use internally of them. We've already started discussions about that, haven't we, Richard, about how we ensure that we are best aligned with best practice nationally. I don't think it's such a journey for us to travel, actually. There is some complexity in the integration of what are very well developed policies in London against national operational guidance, but that is well underway. It is, again, the attitudinal piece. We need to learn the lessons from elsewhere as much as ourselves.
Yes, because of cross-border work and everything else would concern me. Roy, if I can ask you, are you assured that the Brigade's new operational improvement process and reporting structure fully considers the national operation guidance and what more needs to be done?
Well, I have certainly discussed with Andy and a little bit with Richard about how that national operational guidance can be implemented in London. I will say it was a slight surprise to me that, given the fact that London almost started the project, that they hadn't adopted some of the outcomes earlier. So, but there's a great plan in place now as well. And I also make an offer. I've made an offer to Andy before. I know London is much bigger and much more complex, but we have, as National Fire Chiefs Council, gone into Avon, West Sussex, Surrey, Cornwall, Northern Ireland to be a critical friend. So if that helps at all in this process, we would do the same here.
It must concern you because we do have cross-border assistance, don't we? And we give cross-border assistance. Okay, the London Fire Brigade, to Roy again if I can, is the only service that does not use the National Incident Command decision control process. Do you support the HMI in saying that this needs immediate attention?
I believe it is getting immediate attention. I think the new linear decision-making process isn't completely broken. It's not, you know, it can still be used, but this the new decision-making process and decision controls is based on fundamental research of actual incident commanders. So I think it would add to the training, and I know again that's in the plan to move that forward.
Well, that's good. So, Andy, then will the brigade reconsider its use of the National Incident Command decision control process, and what actions have you put towards this already?
Richard will be able to give the detail, but what I would say is yes, in principle, we are looking at it and considering it. Where I have to be careful is that the decision-making model we currently use, which actually was the forerunner of the DCP, is something that's been embedded for a very, very long time. And as I'm driving forward basic skills in the brigade, I need to be careful not to unpick something that in many ways works for our incident commanders. I think that what Roy's talking about works. It's about how we then bring that forward into the learning we deliver to our incident commanders and enable them to use it where appropriate. So, Rich, do you perhaps have some detail on this?
Certainly. So the decision command process was reviewed some time ago, and a corporate decision was made the very start from memory last year, early part of last year, around the adoption of DCP when the inquiry was in the process of running. We came to the conclusion in relation to some of the points the Commissioner has just made around wanting to see the process of phase 1 run out around the instant command before making the decision around that particular element. We've reviewed the DCP against our current model, and it's the lateral versus the diamond principle of the diagram that our policies and our training up to level 1, 2 and 3 and 4 include those fundamental principles, although I do acknowledge DCP diagram and the adoption of that currently isn't in place. However, what I can say is that the level 1 course is due to be piloted in Q1 of this year to look at the DCP, and then we rolled out in Q2. Level 2 will be rolled out in Q3, and then level 3 and 4 will shortly follow afterwards. So we have recognised the adoption of DCP. It's about how we then include that in some of those ongoing maintenance of skills training for instant command, and that is being rolled out this year.
Okay, for everybody, DCP stands for?
Sorry, apologies. Decision command process.
Yeah, okay.
Part of instant command.
Because people do watch this, so...
Sorry, I do apologise.
It's all right, it's fine. So, what I've touched on it before about the cross-border risks. Are you training staff specifically in the differences between us and other brigades?
So the cross-border work from the HMI, we have looked at changing the borough training plan that currently exists that each borough commander holds, specifically on those that have cross-border activities, and that they are training and exercising going forward with their counterparts. In relation to practicing operational policies and procedures and equipment as well, that we have safeguards in place and procedures in place that will enable us to work alongside our colleagues. So an example would be entry control. So I mentioned earlier about a rapid entry board. We wouldn't have that, but what we would have is we'd have a sector of the incident that will be run by our firefighters in conjunction with their incident commander, with a sector commander that would be one of ours. So we work very much hand in glove with the incident commander from the county brigades and support them in both officer level and firefighter level. But because there is a variation of equipment and because there is a variation in policy, we put those additional safeguards in place.
Okay, you say you were looking at the training. Have you done the training? So that's on, just yes, comfort that it's being done or it has been done?
Yeah, it's ongoing. We've identified what the HMI have said, and we're changing those borough training plans to make sure that's happening.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much.
Just to follow that, incident level 1 training,
yes,
which we talked about earlier on, I'm going to come to in a minute. Is the refresher training, revalidation training going to include decision command process?
Yes. So we're rolling that out in Q2, as I said earlier.
Okay. Before I bring Flo in, another one from me, from the Inspectorate. They were concerned about the infrequent use of operational discretion. Only 6 occasions over 2 years did commanders diverge from standard plans across the piece. Do you share this concern, and do you think you have the right culture to encourage commanders to use their initiative and feel supported in the aftermath, should they take their decision for the right reasons but turn out to be wrong in the end?
Not at the moment, no. I think that's part of the wider cultural change. It's about better skilling up our leaders, because the issue with operational discretion is at the point you're taking genuine operational discretion, you're in an environment where you're beyond the boundaries of existing policy, and therefore you're into the realm of moral decision making, leadership in the most clear-cut way. And actually I would accept, because I've seen the results of our own staff engagement process, that not all of our leaders, our instant commanders, feel supported to take that discretion. What I would say is that as much as we will drive the changes through in leadership, it must be supported by a basic skills programme, because you need very good fundamental underpinning skills to be able to take discretionary decisions on the instant ground. You know, it speaks to many of the issues that the reports have identified. So my honest answer to you is no, not at this point, but then that is Richard's job in the changes to training delivery that are being driven through to change that culture and therefore embody better decision making.
So if I may add, so I mentioned earlier around the additional courses that we're putting in place, and I've mentioned the 64 metre aerial. So one of those courses, and we've got 16 courses currently that are in the process of looking at how we're going to commission those. One of those is operational discretion training, and what that might look like. It is very early days, but it is something that is absolutely at the forefront of our mind, and that is about equipping firefighters and officers to operate in what is a very dynamic and changing built environment, of which the Hackett Review and others have identified.
No, it's empowerment. Right, in the rest of the country, you saw these figures of only 6 in 2 years. Is operational discretion used more in other brigades?
I haven't got the figures in front of me. I think it's certainly in some areas, because it was a recognition that we can't write policies for everything. So we've had generic risk assessments, we've had dynamic risk assessment. We know the next thing is operational discretion, because there are things that you have to deal with that are not written down, you've never dealt with before. I think it is, and it's the same with national operational guidance, is better embedded in some services than others. London Fire Brigade is not the only service that's has not done national operational guidance completely. So what we need is some central support to help services implement the whole guidance procedure.
Are there any national figures on the extent of...
Not an operational discretion, no.
Can I just make the point that I think 6 is a bit of a red herring, actually? I think people are taking, you know, at a lower level, decisions at incidents requiring operational discretion on a daily basis, actually. I think that's happening right now, probably. However, what I will completely accept is I do not think we have given all of our incident commanders the tools to do so effectively. In fact, I think it's a reflection of the fact that we haven't, that you've only had 6 reported incidents of it. And actually, I'm not sure that even amongst those 6 reported incidents, I would necessarily agree all of them were genuinely examples of operational discretion. I think we've got, you know, a task on our hands there to really embed a culture where people feel empowered to take reasonable decisions, sometimes outside of policy, but only when it's appropriate to do so, and in a way that is measured, thought out, and then clearly communicated to the people they're in command of. You know, it's a complex area, and I absolutely accept, because it is clear out of both reports, that we need to do better at that.
Good morning still. We've touched on some of the issues on incident command earlier in your response to previous questions. I just wanted to focus a little bit more on the training around that. So again, we know that the report highlighted a number of concerns and the recommendation of the date from HMIC FRS for the recommendation for the brigade to try and bring that up to speed, end of February 2020. I just wanted to touch on the training and to both maybe Matthew and you, Commissioner, in terms of there's numerous training courses being introduced for the incident command. Will this be solely delivered by Babcock?
I actually think Richard is probably best placed to start with the detail of that, because there's a mix of stuff, isn't there?
So currently, in order to meet that deadline date that was provided, I've previously answered around level 1 and level 2, and the fact that we have, in effect, with the support of Babcock, had to deliver some of that down at the Fire Service College. In the long term, we are working very closely with Babcock in the scheduling of next year, and it will be a biannual cycle, including revalidation as well. So the intention is to rely on Babcock to specifically deliver level 1 and level 2. I recognise that level 3 and level 4 is slightly more complex in relation to having subject matter expertise in that, and it makes the point the Chair made earlier about the benefits of strategic commanders working nationally with strategic command colleagues. We have got a number of courses that are provided nationally, both CBRN Gold training and the MAGIC course, the multi-agency training course, which is aimed at the level 3 and level 4 responders. Level 3 is a piece of work that once we've done level 1 and level 2, we're working with Babcock to do. We have issued or undertaken a trial utilising a previous strategic commander's expertise to deliver that course, but we'll continue to work with Babcock. My preferred choice would be, as long as we get the right person for level 3 and level 4 to deliver that training, then I'm open to the flexibility of the future contract to allow me to look at who is the best person to provide that. Level 1 and level 2, as it currently stands and as it has always been, it's been Babcock, recognising that we did have that upsurge at the end of this Q4, requiring us to go to Fire Service College.
That's good, and it's good to hear that you've got the trial going. So just based on that, again, I appreciate it's early days. Do you feel that the LFB's on track to implement that enhanced level 3 training by the end of 2020-2021?
So our focus is delivering on level 2 now, and then we'll be focusing on level 3. My aim is if it looks like we are unable to secure the right people within Babcock, then I will be having a conversation with Babcock about whether we outsource that training. It's fair to say that we have had some of those challenging conversations, but it has been very supportive on both sides of the fence, both as the client and the provider. I'm very clear that level 2 and level 1 is where we have the greatest number of officers to train, so I'd rather focus on those two first. Level 3, instant commanders, just providing assurance, if my memory serves me correctly, is 78%, which is a figure. So those that are currently competent and qualified for 78%. What that doesn't include is all those officers that may have gone through an assessment centre recently and undertaken an instant command exercise to see whether they were level 3 and level 4 ready, if you want a better word. So the actual numbers are reassuring, bearing in mind they are relatively small numbers we're talking about as individuals. But yes, level 3 is definitely my intention to try and get it done by the end of the year.
That's good. And I think, again, just going back to the report and some of the criticisms highlighted in that, and how do you feel that the LFB will measure the effectiveness and success of the incident command revalidation? Again, bearing in mind that you've got additional implementations coming in 3 and 4 later on.
Okay, so there's a number of ways that we can do that and will do that. One is we have obviously the assurance officer function that I've mentioned previously that we could send into Babcock to do that assurance piece. More importantly, and that's like a general piece for training if we chose to do that. More importantly, the operation review team, who are in effect our people that go out and monitor and assure the incident ground, will also be part of that for Babcock. Now, if we are discovering from the reporting lines about revalidation over a period of time that the percentages are low in relation to instant command revalidation, then we will of course look at what is the contributing factor to those low figures. Currently, and it is very early days, I can report that as yet, as of today, we have not had anyone come below the 50% mark. But that said, you know, it is fair to say that I'm sure there will be people that will require additional support and development.
I think as a general point, this again comes back to scrutiny and audit. So we're looking at an audit committee generally sitting independently of the brigade as part of our corporate plan to scrutinise everything we're doing. And in particular, in the particular context of operational training, I'm very clear that I need an independent operational advisor who basically will have free rein to go wherever I want them to. I would expect that person to periodically sit inside level 3 and level 4 training and come back and give me an honest version of what is happening. And the reason for that is because you might understand that I'm a commissioner in a very different place now. I have no illusions about the environment I'm operating in, nor my responsibilities, nor the level of scrutiny I expect. So I expect to scrutinise myself well before others scrutinise me. You know, it is in my interest to ensure that this is being done properly. You know, the competency of our incident commanders sits at the very heart of our ability to deliver a service to Londoners. Yeah. You know, I have no interest in terms of fudging the figures, nor not getting that standard right. And I think it's for yourselves to demand that assurance as well. We need to open ourselves up and we need to listen to what you have to say about, you know, your scrutiny of that, what you think might be appropriate.
If I may add. So if you look at the transformational plan that you received yesterday, it makes it very clear about an assurance function and an independence in relation to that. As part of the transformational work, we are also looking at how we govern ourselves internally, and there's a process around the governance, and have we got the right machinery internally to enable us to be more effective as part of the transformation. So in support of the Commission.
We'll be looking at this at our next meeting. We're going to focus.
Sorry, I do apologise.
We're going to focus on the transformation project.
It's fine.
Just coming to the point that you mentioned, Commissioner, and again, you do touch on it in the transformation, and again, mindful that the Chair said we will look at that, but you're very quite clear in your opening statement. We accept the recommendations in both reports. LFB needs to learn to adapt in a more agile and rapid way. And in the past, you stated, Commissioner, that the LFB cannot get senior officers to major incidents any faster because of the vast expansion of cover arrangements that this would need. In that case, do you feel that your station commanders and group commanders are ready to take on those responsibilities and any associated discretionary decisions needed, especially for larger incidents?
Excuse me, Chair, before, I'm not sure whether you was told I need to leave it for a personal funeral. Close friend of mine.
We're going to come on to you next. As soon as Chloe's got an answer to that question. Thanks.
So just in response to that question, I think the answer to you is I need greater assurance of people's ability to take discretionary decisions at every single level, actually. The answer does not lie in getting, I'm really clear about this, by the way, it does not lie in getting senior officers to the incident quicker. It's about genuinely where the risk lies, which is all incidents in London start with an initial response. And it is the actions taken in the earliest part of those incidents that tend to form the nature of the incident as it follows. So I think I can fairly reflect that I don't have the assurance I need at this point, but this is why we have brought forward incident command revalidation at level 1 and level 2, particularly at a pace, the training at a pace, because that is what gives us that assurance. It would be wrong of me to sit in front of you today and say I do have absolute certainty in that. That is why I recognise the recommendations within the report, and we are driving that change and that training programme at a pace. It's why you saw the surge. That is what will give me that confidence.
Okay. We need to move on, Chloe, because Roy has to go, I know, and thank you for hanging on for a minute, but Susan's got some questions for you.
Thank you. It's just one question, and we are grateful for your staying. Thank you. What progress has been made nationally in developing policies and training for the partial and total evacuation of high-rise residential buildings, as recommended in the Grenfell Tower Inquiry Phase 1 report?
Probably not as quickly as we would all hope. Both myself and Danny Cotton, when she was Commissioner, wrote to government to say this is research, because it is a building strategy rather than a fire service policy. This is research, and the research started with the first meeting in December last year, so that's almost 2.5 years after the incident. I actually wrote to MHCLG 2 days ago to say we've had that meeting, we've heard nothing since, we need to move forward. But what we're now setting up as well, along with London Fire Brigade, Greater Manchester and others, is a national group on policy. So we're going to write our own policy. To be frank, we're fed up waiting for government to catch up with us. So we're getting a policy in for the fire service whilst this other research is going on. But it hasn't moved as fast as it should have done.
No, because you'll understand people are concerned that live in high-rise about whether they should do the stay put policy, whether they should run, or whatever else. I won't ask you anymore because I do understand where you're going.
Just one little bit of clarification. What we have done in the interim is have the interim measures with wake and watch and simultaneous evacuation and silly things like barbecues on balconies, those sorts of things. So we've tried to mitigate the risk in particularly ACM-clad buildings by doing the same policy nationally on interim measures.
Okay, and if you need help from government, please let us know, and some of us will be able to push forward and make ourselves heard. So please do let us know.
I understand, Roy, that Kit Malthouse has said the Home Office will only begin the tendering process for the first package of research next month. That's information that we've had, and the outcome of that will then inform operational research later in the year. So nationally, it's going to be some time before anything substantive comes out. So when do you think we can expect to see a national guidance on stay put and mass evacuation?
We will have national operational guidance long before that, and I would hope by certainly by the April time. By the time this is because people like London and Manchester and Kent have done some good work on this already. So it's not like we're starting afresh. We just need to make sure that national operational guidance reflects the local experience as well.
So the Fire Chiefs Council will be publishing national guidance by April.
I'm hoping that we will have agreement amongst the chiefs that we'll be able to publish by then, yes.
Excellent, well that's good news.
It's only 3 years since Grenfell.
Yes.
I know, but as I say, if you need any assistance, I'm sure many of us have got connections that we would be happy to help with. So I understand you're going now, so
Yes,
thank
yeah.
you so much.
Apologies.
No, we totally understand. If I can turn to Andy or Richard, when will the Brigade's revised policy note, which is numbered 633, be published?
So this was cleared at my Commissioners' Board yesterday. I've got 5 days to consider and take the final decision within our governance processes. I'm fairly sure that with some minor amendments to wording, that the policy I presented in front of me yesterday will be then published following that decision, and we will begin the process of implementation. That is an absolute priority to me. That policy is the cornerstone of all our work in recognising what is now the foreseeable risk of a catastrophic fire such as Grenfell, and it would be remiss of me not to bring that forward as a priority.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear it is a priority, because people out there certainly think it is, certainly if they're in a high rise. Obviously, there's going to have to be more training around this for it to filter through. So what are the timescales around that training?
Okay, so I've tasked for all three of the policies related to high-rise policy, so that includes fire survival guidance and evacuation policies, to be in place at the earliest opportunity, which I think is likely to be towards March or April, because it's going to take that time to properly train all of the people we need to within the workforce. We're testing the policy and the procedures across a range of exercises, which I'm hoping you've received an invite to, or will shortly be receiving an invite to, using high-rise buildings across London, with several planned from February, and I will take that as an action, obviously, to ensure that invite comes to you. What I would say is that it's a difficult place to be in, because you've made a good point to Roy as a national colleague, that people have struggled to find an appropriate answer in terms of what we might ask firefighters to do in this changed world. The real answer to the Grenfell fire is building regulation needs to change and improvements to the built environment needs to happen, but that is going to take many years, I would anticipate. So what you will see as a reflection of the challenge of that environment and some of the things we might reasonably ask firefighters to do, but I recognise it as an absolute priority. It will not be without its challenges, because they are therefore operating in a higher risk environment than we would like, because they are in buildings that are not operating as they are designed to. It meets those, but it's probably a reflection of the difficulty of that work. It has taken so long to get to it. Because of the position I'm in, I've just taken a clear decision on it, because I feel it is imperative to do so, and it is what Londoners deserve. What I would recognise is the challenge of doing so.
I also think more work needs to be done around letting Londoners know why you do what you do, why there is a stay put policy sometimes and why there isn't, because sometimes that needs to be explained, because lots of Londoners would just think everybody should get out of a building, and I absolutely understand why there's a stay put policy, but then I've been involved with the brigade for years. Lots of people don't, and it really does need to be out there as to why you do that. So how many operational staff in the London Fire Brigade have completed training following the guidance that was issued in August 19 on responding to the rapid spread of fire on the outside of buildings?
I'm afraid I don't have that information to hand, but I can provide it to you in writing.
Approximately?
I couldn't answer that straight away.
This is a really important question, Richard.
Absolutely, I accept that. I don't think I have anything to hand that I can refer to. Is that the Option News 37 that you're talking about?
It's the guidance that was issued in August 19. I haven't got the numbers down here. But on responding to a rapid spread fire with obviously...
yeah, I think it's Option News 37. I don't think we have the data to hand, so I apologise for that, but I can certainly provide you with that.
Can I just say, though, that I don't think what was provided in August 2019 does enough. And actually, whilst you're right to ask us, I wouldn't pretend that that's sufficient to fully prepare our people to operate in what I think is a much more complicated and potentially high-risk environment where buildings might fail. The publishing of the policy that I saw yesterday will begin to address that, but it needs to be embodied in face-to-face training, good quality training. We started to do that in December because we anticipated this policy coming through. So all of my middle managers, the officers that Florence is referring to, are receiving face-to-face training in a high-rise environment, talking about the complexity of discretionary decision-making when aspects of that building fail. That's already begun. The challenge now is to ensure that the consistency and the quality of that training is rolled out across the whole operational workforce, and that is the work that is unfolding basically as a result of me seeing the policy yesterday and understanding that I need to make a decision, and I am minded to make a decision to pass that, and it will fall from there.
Okay, so if I put it in more simplistic terms, if, God forbid, and the outside of a building just suddenly takes fire again, as some of us to our horror saw before, what guidance now, at this moment, do firefighters, if they arrive there, what have they been trained to do that's different, given that this is in situ?
They've received the training that was an online package in August, which gives them the information that they would need to consider if faced with that. And it's a very clear package, to be fair, in read it, and it offers common sense advice. But in the context of what we need to change in terms of operational procedures, that is obviously a longer process because it has to be done in consultation with the Fire Brigades Union. It requires face-to-face training, amendment of policy. That's what's happening now and will be driven forward as a priority. We have given what I would consider to be the most basic provision to officers to recognise it could happen, the sort of decisions they might have to make, some good guidance around it, but that needs to be supported and better embedded with changes to operational procedure because the built environment has changed in that regard.
But Andy, that's a really worrying response.
It's a truthful response.
And I'm grateful for the truth, but it's worrying even so. If so many people in high rises are living there with still the cladding on the building, to hear you saying that there's been online training on what they should do that's different, and that nothing has been, there's nothing that's been put in as a guidance there that they know about. If the only thing that's gone in so far is online training, do we not have those figures of how many
We're talking about the wider operational workforce there. What I can say is that all our middle managers, so station commanders, have received face-to-face briefings now around the possibility of external fire spread. So that had happened, and we can provide figures on that. Also, all crews, and we'll have to write to you to give you confirmation of this, have received face-to-face training around fire safety in high-rise blocks, which feeds into their operational delivery. I just want to be honest with you accept that I think what is coming now, and I would anticipate challenge potentially from the Fire Brigades Union about it, is a new high-rise policy that recognises the difficulty of operating in that environment. This is why the decision didn't get taken, because it is a difficult decision. I am certain that my promise to Londoners, my statutory responsibility means I have to take the decision I have, and that will best equip my firefighters to operate safely in that environment, recognising that some buildings simply could fail in a catastrophic way, and we need to think very carefully about how we amend existing operational procedures to recognise that.
Okay, I would just leave it by saying that we would have far more comfort if we knew how many of our firefighters were updated on this specific issue, given the catastrophic events of a couple of years ago.
So we'll provide you with information around the guidance note that you referred to earlier. The point the Commission is making around policy note 633. So the creation and the development of training packages reflect our policy notes, and the fact that that came there to the Commission's board yesterday reflects many years of development of a policy that it's fair to say both the National Fire Service and other fire brigades have struggled to deal with about the changing environment. The intention is a number of approaches in which how we're going to do that. So we've done the face-to-face briefings of middle managers around the new policy and what it may look like, subject to Commissioner's decision in 5 days' time. We would then propose to do face-to-face training of our junior officers on fire stations, and then over a longer period of time we'll be producing that to all of the workforce, but that will take time. What I would emphasise, as the Commission said, is about the environment which crews are operating in. So in order to mitigate some of those risks and bring some of those risks down, we have introduced new pieces of equipment that are coming online now that will help them in what we are proposing to do, which will form part of that training. Until we are completely satisfied that we have the necessary number of people trained and aware on how to do that, particularly at officer level, that we're making those decisions, then we won't be enacting the policy until we know we've got the equipment and everyone has been suitably trained in it.
Okay, thank you.
A couple of follow-ups. The new kit you're talking about, is that the 64-metre ladders?
No,
or are you talking about Cobra and PPV?
No, this is about internal firefighting in high-rise buildings. So, actually, Richard, you're better off explaining. But
So there are 3 items of equipment we're looking to procure. Some additional fire escape hoods, which we carried in a bag on the frontline appliance. So if we had to do mass evacuation, which was the primary question, then we'll have the capability to do that. We'll also be carrying those on our operation support units, which will now enable us to bring more on if we require. We are looking at procuring, and we need to go through the governance process internally around gas monitors, so we can assign those to frontline crews for stairwell protection, which is the part of the policy that you may or may not be aware of. And then in addition to that, we are going to have a system which are in effect smoke curtains. So where you open the door into a fire affected floor, the stairway becomes full of smoke. So these curtains are designed to allow us to do our operation activities but protect the stairwell as much as possible, as well as have a firefighting system in place that will enable us to send crews elsewhere within the building while still protecting that route.
Okay. Can I just make the point that there will be some challenge around this, because the reason no one nationally has put their feet down on this over the past, and you're absolutely right to articulate the fact that we're 2.5 years on from the fire and no one has come to an answer, is because it is in some ways a contentious decision. We are inevitably exposing firefighters to greater risk to meet our statutory responsibilities because the built environment is not acting as it should. I cannot wait, for the built environment to be fixed. I have to take action now on behalf of Londoners and my own firefighters, because the reality is, I've seen it with my own eyes, if London firefighters are confronted with the catastrophic failure of a building, it doesn't really matter what is written as a policy. They will put themselves at great risk to save the people inside. I accept that as a reality. So therefore, I must bring forth a policy that enables them to do so as safely as possible. It is both about their safety and the safety of Londoners. Okay. What I really need is a change in building regulation and the changes to the built environment driven forward by government and other interested stakeholders at a pace, because until that point, I am inevitably exposing my firefighters at greater risk than I would perhaps want to tolerate to deliver our statutory duties. I have no other option.
I asked Danny at a previous meeting of this committee if she was planning to do a mass evacuation drill from a tower block, and she said she wasn't. So I'll ask you.
Yeah, we are. They're planned and they're in the diary, and you'll get an invite to them.
Thank you. And have you had to evacuate any high-rise residential buildings since Grenfell?
Not to my knowledge, no. But obviously it is now foreseeable. And actually what we are dealing with is people self-evacuating, which comes back to your point about trust and confidence. I'm very concerned about that, because they put themselves at greater danger in doing so in the majority of cases. Stay put is still ultimately the best policy, the best strategy for the majority of high-rise buildings in London. I need to, as a general point, and it's embodied within the corporate plan, I need to rebuild that trust and confidence in our service so that when my officers turn up at an incident and ask people to stay put, they have the faith in our service to do so.
And just last question, the exercises you've just been talking about, are they going to be delivered by the brigade or Babcock, or both?
Brigade. There we go.
Thanks. Over to you on control.
Yes, I mean that's obviously a very difficult area to follow on from, and I couldn't agree with you more when you were talking about the urgent need for the review of building regulations, and I really do hope that's something the government gets on with as soon as possible, because certainly the David Cameron-led coalition got on with the bonfire of red tape very promptly, which unfortunately I think has led into some of the problems that we're facing today. However, I'm not going to ask you about anything to do with mass evacuation or incident control. I want to talk to you about the control room, because obviously our responsibility and what you were just referring to, Andy, in terms of responsibility towards the firefighters who will put themselves at physical risk. We also had a large number of people in the control room who were taking those incredibly heart-rending calls, which some of us have listened to. And I visited the control room a couple of times now, and it's quite a high-pressure environment, because obviously on the night that Grenfell happened, everything else didn't stop in London, so they were still trying to manage lots of other things. Now, there's been some changes. You've changed up having a principal operations manager, and you've now brought in an assistant commissioner role that's been created. And I just wondered if you could talk about what impact, or indeed anyone else, what impact that change has had in terms of understanding the way that control operates and also in terms of the training that those staff might need as a post-Grenfell?
Well, I think I'd start by recognising the burden that was placed in our control room that night. I went to visit the day after Grenfell, actually, and you know, I stood in front of 9 people who had effectively handled that volume of calls that night and was just transfixed really by their vulnerability and the pressure they had been under. And that's really what drove the decision to change the leadership model in there, because again, so much of this comes down to leadership, culture, fundamental transformation, and the sole reason for putting an AC in there was to drive that process. That has resulted in a control improvement plan, which, recognising the complexity of the change needed, is a 5-year plan with short, medium and long-term objectives. It addresses all of the recommendations from the Grenfell Tower and HMI report, in particular things as simple as the physical configuration of the control room to ensure that they have the best access to information, their training and the recording of that training.
Sorry, yes, can I just stop you there, because between my first visit and my second visit there had been substantial changes made in terms of the layout. My first visit was in 2016, which predated Grenfell, and my second visit post-dated Grenfell. Are the changes in layout that I saw as a result of the new improvement?
That's
plan?
the result of the implementation plan. So access to widescreen visual information that's mirrored now at the Stratford fallback control as well. Refresher training, particularly in regard to fire survival guidance, is being delivered throughout January to all control officers and will be built on as the policy itself evolves. You know, I'm afraid to say that we just didn't give control the leadership and attention it needed. That is being addressed again at a pace, and I believe you've had the control implementation plan, and it forms a key part of my priorities within the corporate delivery plan as well. It is Jonathan Smith, who's the AC down there. It is his business to again drive that through at a pace. But again, I would welcome your scrutiny. I would welcome you into there to speak to control officers themselves and hear from them, because actually that is the real test for me, whether it is about training, whether it's about the wider transformation piece. I would welcome the opportunity for you to come, not to talk to me, not to come and see.
We've got a visit scheduled for next month.
Yeah, no, that's great, because I think the challenge best comes from firefighters. They're going to tell you the truth from control operators. The test for me, whether I've been successful, will be in a year and a half's time, whether it's you or Her Majesty's inspectors that walk onto one of my fire stations, that a firefighter can tell the story of our change in a positive way, recognising where there may be some improvements to be made, but will absolutely understand the journey we've been on as an organisation and why. That is the true test, and I would welcome your help in scrutinising that, really.
So would you say that there's been reasonably good progress in terms of not only the development of the new control improvement plan, but also some parts of it have already been implemented? Would that be a fair characterisation?
Yes, I think so, having been down there and spoken to control staff. But that shouldn't allow any complacency. There's a lot to be done down there. So yes, I think good start has been made, but it's the same as everywhere else in the organisation. Transformation is something that comes with an energy. You know, this isn't something that's one hit. If we genuinely want to provide the service to Londoners I think they absolutely deserve, and my people best embody and they deserve, then there can be no complacency. It has to be a fundamental change in culture forever.
No, I think that's fair, and I believe that one of the aims of the improvement plan is to make the control and mobilising department of the London Fire Brigade an exemplar across fire and rescue services. So you wouldn't say you've achieved that yet?
No.
No.
But I think the quality of the people we have in there, the volume of the calls they take, because don't forget it's the busiest control room again in the country and I believe in Europe for fire. You know, they have a lot of experience. We just need to better support them with training. The quality of the people are excellent. I don't think it'll take us so long to get there. And actually, we've made good progress against feeding into the national piece. That's one area where we are absolutely kind of locked into the national debate around how you manage FSG. Good suggestions have been made. We've put key officers in place into groups in a leadership role nationally now, where, you know, the learning we've gathered post-Grenfell is being fed in.
So just to touch on that again, the whole issue of stay put versus leave now is not just an issue for the control and command on the fire site, but is also an issue for people who are receiving those phone calls. Is that an area where you are specifically training? Because obviously on the night, you know, they were taking calls for over many hours of people saying, should I evacuate my home? You know, I'm not going to go into the details because we've all heard them, but I mean, it was very difficult for them. Where are they getting guidance in terms of making a decision to give somebody advice about whether they continue to stay put or whether they should actually now evacuate, bearing in mind the obvious impact on the firefighters on the ground who may be trying to use the one staircase if we're in a one staircase situation?
That sits at the heart of the training that's being delivered to them now in January. That whole decision-making process about stay put to get out sits at the heart of the training they're receiving. But it has to be backed by improvements to communication between the incident ground and control, because it's that return loop that ensures the right decision is made in the context of all the information that people are seeing in different parts of the organisation. A lot of thought's being given to that at the moment. They're looking at an IT solution around sharing of information. It's a key part of the control implementation plan.
Yes, because that definitely seems from you know, what we've seen in the first part of the Grenfell inquiry to have been quite an issue on the night.
Well, I mean, again, I can only reflect personally. At the point I stepped onto the command unit that was responsible for fire survival guidance, we had 178 live calls on the board. I mean, there is something about the scale of that is almost impossible to deal with. So you're never going to get to an ideal point, but we just need to do a lot better in terms of how we manage, handle and return information between the two parts of the organisation, and that forms a key part in the detail of the plan you have.
Yeah, I mean, I believe they took over 600 calls that were just Grenfell related that night, let alone any other calls that were coming through from other incidents that were taking place across London. And that is a phenomenal amount of attention that they need to pay. Because when you're in the control room, watching them dealing with calls coming in, you know, the faster they're coming in, obviously, it does start to be very difficult. So 178 live calls is almost impossible for most of us to imagine how it would be handled. In terms of the refresher training, that's going to be annual. That's going to be something that comes up every year.
I think they're going to. It's more frequently that, because what we're doing is applying a similar model that we have on stations to DAMOP, which is a circular package of competency-based training across all areas. That's what they're getting, and actually you might have more of the detail around phase 2, because it's part of phase 2 of the. I'm sorry for the acronyms. It's our maintenance of skills training.
You're very good on acronyms in the fire brigade, actually.
We love them.
I think you might even be worse than the police, who
quite possibly
specialise them.
So I try and avoid them,
quite a lot
Richard.
as well.
There's the challenge.
Sorry, so the ongoing development and maintenance of operational professionalism, DAMOP. So part of the phase 2 around specialist skills that we are delivering is for the control operating staff, which will have a number of processes in place that they can do over an annual reciprocal basis. That is specified to be completed by June this year. In addition to that, and obviously the additional training they've got, they're receiving around FSGs. We accept that we're looking at that policy, and part of the trialling of that will be part of that exercise in February for high-rise. As well as that, when you talk about the situational awareness and the challenges on the night, the recommendation. So they have a screen now that connects to our drone capability. So the situational awareness, the visual situational awareness they can have, as well as the Commissioner's indicated around the lines of communication and how they operate from a multi-agency point of view, which is work being done. The control plan talks about a 5-year plan, short, medium, long term. I don't have the full details about exactly where we are with the short term, but the information I've just imparted to you there would obviously demonstrate the desire and the need to make sure we do some very, very quick wins. So there has been significant improvements in the short term, but we recognise it's a 5-year plan.
And I gather we were questioning the Mayor, and he said that policy note 790, or PN 790 as opposed to PN 633, I can get lost in these acronyms as well if needs be, is being revised. Has that been completed now, or is this one still in progress?
That's well advanced. The reason why that hasn't happened to this point is we needed to publish the high-rise policy. There's an order to these things. So we need the revised high-rise policy first, which takes into account fire survival guidance, the handling of those matters. Having now taken that decision, which was a difficult decision and, you know, will be formally, expressed as part of the governance cycle, That allows us now to progress all those other bits of work and train to it, and that will also be featured in the exercises we will be inviting you to, because it is part of that triangle between high-rise policy, how we handle the calls, how we advise people in the context of mass evacuation.
So if I can add around fire survival guidance, so we have worked, the policy department has worked very, very closely with control and mobilising to make sure that it's not only the policy that works for frontline crews and officers on the front line, but also for the control operators as well. So part of those exercising and testing, and this will be the live physical test using a high-rise capability as well, will be the first time we do it in that environment. Policy note 633 high-rise is the cornerstone, as I coin it, in relation to other policies that will lead off it around evacuation and also fire survival guidance. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're the only environments we'll operate it in, so we can use it for hospitals and other environments such as that. So it is important that we get the training right for high-rise and get that policy ratified with the Commissioner's permission in 5 days. And then at that point, we can then build on it and work with Babcock to deliver those training packages.
Right, because it's obviously really, and talking about it in terms of the control staff, any changes that come through obviously needs to include all of them, because they are such a key part of the process.
Yeah.
They may not be the front face of the fire brigade that members of the public see on the fire ground, but they are absolutely critical to making sure that the whole thing works as effectively as possible.
They're our first line of response.
Absolutely.
The minute they pick the phone up, they're our first line of response.
They are the front face of the brigade in my mind, because they're generally the first people that anyone has contact with.
They are literally the first responder.
They are the first.
Absolutely.
They're the first responders.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Andrew.
Just a couple of flux from me. Control training, is that delivered in-house or by Babcock?
Oh, training, sorry.
It's delivered in-house currently.
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay. So control training is delivered in-house. Incident Command Level 1 is delivered by Babcock. You then need to train both separate groups on whatever comes out of this process. How do you make sure it all marries together properly?
Richard?
So the commissioning of training, we have, and I apologise for the acronym, and I can't tell you what the acronym stands for, but basically it's a training commissioning process. So the training commissioning process that we operate in relation to the policy and our requirements then get fed to Babcock about how that may look and feel. We are very mindful, and that's why we're involved in the maintenance of skills programme, including the specialists, of how we then wrap that up. So the training that we are providing to firefighters and officers around high-rise and FSG will, to a certain degree, vary slightly to what we'll be asking the control operators to do. So there are many examples where we will train with more than one provider. You've seen us exercise in Lincolnshire with other brigades and other training providers, and also as part of the collaboration piece. So we accept we need to adapt some of our training depending on who we're training. It doesn't mean that we can't work hand in glove with both control training and Babcock training, because really we are the commissioning organisation, so that we the policy assurance and training departments that commission that work, whether that be at control or whether that be with
there's a
Babcock.
crack that things can fall through.
Sorry.
Last question from me. One of the real criticisms in Grenfell 1 is the failure of control, I don't mean that in a pejorative way, to call people back once stay put had been revoked by you, Andy. Has that now been dealt with? So have we now got a callback function beyond 3 calls or whatever it is?
I think we need to come right back to you with the detail of that. There's some real challenges around that in terms of how calls come in, when calls get ended, and the volume required in terms of callback and the information stored. So I know it's something they're looking at as part of the control implementation plan. I haven't got that detail in my head, so I think we need to provide you an answer for that.
Okay, thanks. David?
Yeah, thank you.
Last but by no means least. Last but by no means least.
Hopefully not. Yeah, good morning. So I'm going to ask a few questions just to finish off on managing performance and developing leaders. So in the light of the HMI report and the findings concerning performance, were you surprised by the HMI's findings concerning performance management and the development of leaders in the brigade?
No.
Okay,
No,
fine.
because I don't think we've brought forward with any rigour in my career a leadership programme that best supported our people. And again, there are complex reasons for that. That, you know, I'd rather not dwell on the past, but the answer is no, I wasn't surprised. But therefore, if you were to ask me what my one single priority, if I was ever put in that awful position, would be, it would be to deliver a really deep and far-reaching leadership programme, because I believe it is in the attitudes, behaviours and cultures of organisations that change is driven, and our performance management systems and processes are going to reflect that leadership model, which is simple, easy to understand, is embodied in structures laid out in our corporate plan. So the behaviours we talk about, compassion, togetherness, accountability, that sit at the heart of what we do and how we deliver our service, will form part of that framework. I anticipate a new performance management framework for individuals, including appraisal, to be in place from the start of the new financial year. A fair amount of work has already been done by Tim Powell, our Head of People Services, bringing in external advice as well, recognising we don't have all the answers, having got to this position prior to Christmas, and he has assured me that he will be in that position to deliver that, set against the new framework at that point.
So you're confident then that you can personally ensure that you'll put into place all the recommendations in ensuring effective systems and reviewing individual staff performance and development and that?
I'm confident that we'll bring forward a leadership programme on a scale that hasn't been seen generationally. I'm confident that we will put in place a simple and appropriate framework. Honestly, the job of culture change, I don't think it would be honest to give you an absolute on that. You can judge me on it. I welcome your scrutiny, because the real test, I'll come back to it, is if you go to Tottenham Fire Station and Firefighter Smith can articulate how leadership has been improved for them, you know, what training they have received, what it means to them. So it's all very well for me to assure you. I would rather that you came and assured yourselves and you spoke to Firefighter Smith, because that is the acid test for me. You know, I can say what I like in here to an extent. The real judge will be my own people, the people of London, as they experience our service. And I would welcome your scrutiny assurance as part of that. It's got to be felt to the most junior levels of the organisation. The system will be right. I think the model is right. The delivery of it and how it is driven across 103 different locations and over 5,000 staff is a greater challenge and will take some time. I would not be as arrogant as to think that is either simple in the scale of that, nor would I want it to be judged on what I say to you. I want it to be judged by our delivery and by sense checking it, frankly, with our most junior members of staff, because that would show that I've been able to push that kind of culture and message through the organisation.
Yeah, thanks for your answer. I know you know the need for transformational change, but do you think that the LFB has the right people in place at senior level and the right structures in place to drive that transformational change needed, including for training?
I think the quality of our people is good. I think it generally is. I don't think we've always had the systems to properly support them. I've been clear about that again and again. Do I think everyone in my organisation at all levels is ready for this journey, has the skills or the aptitude to deliver the change I want? No. And that is part of bringing in a much more robust appraisal and performance management system in a simpler way for all our staff, because whilst I believe that you best embody leadership in compassion and understanding that the welfare of your people must come first, because then they will be their most productive, I also recognise that the other side of that is people must be held accountable individually for delivering the change they are required to bring forward. If once we have given people that advice, that training, that support, and identified areas where they can improve, they haven't done so, then I'm afraid they may not be able to be leaders in the London Fire Brigade. I think that is a change in culture as well. And neither I nor Sue, who has responsibility ultimately for people services, nor our Head of People Services, Tim, will shy away from that. We've had many conversations on this subject.
Thanks. What further support do you need from the Mayor to ensure that this transformational change across the LFB can take place and implemented immediately?
I feel I have good support from the Mayor and from City Hall. We have a good relationship with Fiona Twycross, our Deputy Mayor. I'm in daily conversation with her. I think the Mayor recognises the scale of the challenge. You know, I meet with the Mayor regularly. He has offered his personal support. We have had good discussion about what transformation looks like. He recognises both the scale of the challenge and the time it might take. So I have no complaints to make in that area. I feel well supported. I think we would just all accept that it is transformation on a scale, and that will be challenging.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all. Robert, is there anything you'd like to add? I won't go to Richard and Andy because they've had a lot to say. Anything you'd like to add?
I think it was a genuine pleasure and a privilege to be involved in carrying out the independent review of training. I'm very encouraged that the recommendations made within my report are being actioned, and the Commissioners gave you, good detail around that this morning, so I don't need to labour the point. But it's a pleasure to come here today and have the opportunity to be involved in the discussion. I'd like to thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you. And Matthew, anything you want to add?
Only to thank you for the opportunity to come and hopefully demonstrate our support for the future. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your contributions. Can we note the report in today's discussion? Can we also delegate authority to me as Chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output from the meeting? Yes. And we've got a couple of formal items we need to discuss, which you can stay for. It won't take a minute. Can we note the Fire Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee work programme?
Noted.
And can we note the date of the next meeting, which is the 5th of March at 2:30 in the Chamber?
Noted.
And we have no other urgent business, so meeting over.
Very much.
GLA